The story begins with you saying that the gods of creation gave everyone the powers to fight the monsters. Thus, the skill tree was created, and that baby you were holding had a variety of skills that even included restoration. Then, we jump in time to the entrance of the monster forest, where a young man was fighting with his sword. Training with the wood, he caught the PIS against the wood. It can't take effect, so he stays there trying for a while until he manages to stick it in. But, when he takes out his sword, it had already broken. The fluid ended up running, so the protagonist looked closely at the weapon and managed to restore it to normal. That way, the blade was perfect, and so he managed to get his 12th slime fluid. But someone soon after screams that he was lost. At that moment, the monster behind the protagonist is killed, and it was magic from some young people who were right behind. They try to attack the tree behind the protagonist and end up making our hero have to dodge. The young man who attacked a monster says that he only intended to seal the movement but ended up missing the spell because of the old man who was there. And now they didn't know how they would get out of that situation. They said that the man was always there at the entrance of the forest to hunt slimes, and the young man gets angry with the protagonist. When his friends try to stop the young man, he says that he would only tell the truth, to look at the protagonist's weapons and armor. Saying that he was totally weak and a beginner, it was proof that his aim was only much weaker monster. It was a waste of time, so he decides to go deeper into the forest to hunt something bigger. At that moment, the protagonist gets up, and 39 years ago, a group of wizards and the people of the village gave the protagonist an ability that was supposed to bring anything back. It was enough to restore the knife that was destroyed by a monster's core a few minutes ago. For now, he could only activate this skill on monsters that were in relation to items that were not used for combat. He was restricted from entering the forest for a long time. So, let's wait at the gates of a city, on the edge of the kingdom, where the warrior ends up accepting the protagonist's entry, asking if he has finished collecting the current clay. The other guards ask him to stop this. Toru, which was the name of our protagonist, ends up showing only his badge while he says that it was not the first time the protagonist showed the lowest rank of adventurers to pass through there. The knight says that the protagonist should go faster and retreat, because it was easier for him to be the guy waiting at the gate. And so, the knight takes a deep breath. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild in the subjugation count, they admit the next person, who was Toru, who ends up handing over everything he took. The receptionist ends up asking what that was, if he came to the right place, because that was the countdown to subjugation. The same adventurers who appeared at the entrance to the forest appear talking to the protagonist. There was no mistake, since those pants he was making were also a type of sublimation. But since he was old, he wanted to have the benefit of the subjugation time, so they would be taking everything from the protagonist. The other adventurer asks him to stop that. When they try to hit the protagonist, Toru ends up retaliating with everything, and they are completely lost. Irritated by that, the other adventurer tries to attack, but Toru ends up dodging, causing him to hit the counter with everything, and ends up spilling all the liquid on the receptionist, who wonders what that was and asks to call the guards. Another receptionist appears, asking if that girl was doing all that again, while welcoming Toru. That new receptionist says that he was a slime fluid, and that she should be very careful while holding that. She says that she would take care of the accounts there. Meanwhile, the protagonist ends up using his restoration ability to return all the liquids to where he had placed them. I bet all this happens, the fluids this time again, and the receptionists are amazed by that. As the protagonist managed to get a horn and 15 more fluids from 5 slimes in the forest there, they give him 95 copper pieces. Toru keeps it in his savings account and ends up leaving, going to the butcher shop. There, the butcher ends up receiving Toru, saying that he managed to get some wonderful meat as always, and that it really helps people, since he can feel that the skin was perfect as always. Toru ends up getting half of the meat, so the butcher goes with the other half. He ends up packing it up, hands over half to Toru, and says that it was a bonus normally, and that he was to keep it as a secret from the boss. Speaking of which, the butcher's boss ends up telling him to go back to work, and that's what he does. Toru leaves the butcher's shop and starts walking around the city, realizing that there was a corner nearby that he had to stop. Toru stops in the corner and opens half of the meat he was getting out of. 2 small street cats, Toru there ends up letting them eat the rest of the meat. But he realizes something. Toru ends up realizing that the third cat wasn't coming as usual, and that he never eats when Toru is there. He comes back, and that he was going to leave for now, then leaving the food for the third cat, who just watches Toru leave. Soon after, Toru ends up going to an inn. An old lady ends up serving him, saying that it has been a while since he appeared. Toru ends up giving all the remaining meat to the lady, and she says that Toru always ends up helping everyone there. Soon, Toru goes to his room and lies down on the bed, because today had been a normal day like all the others. Ricardo was sure that the next day would be the same as always. Only, he opens his eyes. He doesn't pay attention to his closet, realizing that today's points are different. Here, it doesn't make him start to get out of bed, realizing that he has gained enough points from the subjugation. He becomes attentive and approaches the closet, opening the doors slowly. When Toru opens the closet door, he realizes that there was a woman there, and that ends up leaving Toru paralyzed. The woman was lifeless, with a deep cut on her neck, and Toru ends up being paralyzed. So, we go back 25 years. The followers of the God of Ruin returned from the Great Abyss in the center of the world and invaded the village where Toru lives. The monsters ended up attacking all the villages nearby, and everyone ended up losing their lives one after the other. Toru was running with a woman and the priest. They were almost reaching the secret passage, going to the main street, right after that race they were doing. But at that moment, a flying monster ends up attacking Toru, and he manages to cut the animal's wing in half. But at that moment, he turns to say he succeeded. Another animal had already appeared, a praying mantis, and in that, the woman had tried to save Toru at once, and threw herself in front of the mantis's blade that cut directly into her neck. The priest shouted, trying to use extermination skill. He managed to stop time for both the mantis and the woman, and tells Toru to run and take her with him. Toru trembles. The priest still tries to help him, saying that the woman has not yet lost her life, so Toru takes the woman with everything. They go to the medical treatment time, and there he tries to do everything to cure her. But at that moment, another priest says that it was not good. Even with God's healing power, they cannot heal her while the stagnation is activated. But if they release the stagnation, she will lose her life at that exact moment. Toru ends up trembling. The older priest says that there is only one time, and that is to save that child. And Toru ends up asking what it would be. It was his restoration ability. Toru says that it was ridiculous because he can only go back 10 seconds, and it doesn't work for things that are alive. In that case, it was now. For now, Toru increases his own level. That would be a different story. He could even go back in time with the true power of God when he reaches level 10. The stagnation was the same thing too. Toru says that it was useless and that he won't be able to save her. The priest says that it was true, but at that moment, he will follow a path full of suffering and lies and return from him. But Toru does not worry. When the girl comes back to life, he will do everything, even if it takes everything from him. But that suffering was just as the wizard said. Toru would try to defeat monsters to gain skills to increase his own level. But Toru, who has no combat skills, could only run and leave. One day, one of the gate guards, who couldn't sit still and just watch, gave the protagonist a sword to train with. At least he could be quick to fight monsters little by little, so to speak. Toru saw many beginners join groups that got more points than him, and Toru managed to master the art of evasion and counterattack when he reached the age of 30. And when he saved a child from monsters that were attacked in the city one day, he lost half the strength of his left hand. That can add to the explosion, even if he tries. If he hunted small fish every day from morning to night, it would still be more difficult for him to raise his own level than things he would take every day. Even though it wasn't guaranteed that Toru's wish would come true, it wouldn't hurt for him to try. Toru ends up paralyzed and says that he needs to increase his level first, and that's what he tries to do. He sits on the bed, and Toru ends up activating his tree skill. Every human soul was born with a natural skill tree that can create several miracles with that skill. The skill tree had something for the protagonist, and he had more than 10,000 points. He ends up throwing all the water from the spikes that was there at the tree, making the tree grow and sprout some flowers. These flowers had some abilities such as restoring and returning targets involving battles with past conditions, and this ends up getting the attention of Toru. He ends up getting excited. Toru's ability has a restriction that changed according to items turned to targets. That made him hold his own hand, remembering that the gentleman said that now Toru could release real time. The woman passed and left in the middle of the point, but Toru's grandfather had stagnation. He looks closely and takes his grandfather's ashes, trying to use the restoration, but nothing happens. For now, the gods of creation are unable to return to the souls that have already left. It was as expected, but the next one was Toru's right hand, which he ends up trying to use. But he has a vision of himself that was used on his right hand. That reason was the fruit of restoration. Restoration gained ability by looking at the target's past, and that was common to all abilities. Toru ends up trying to move his hand after all, and ends up feeling the blood flowing in his hand. This ends up leaving him with hope, seeing that he can activate it before his glove. Then, he could use restoration if he recognized that he would be aiming at a target directly without touching. Toru, tries to mentally think about the woman who is next to him and asks for it to work once and for all. He uses restoration, and the woman's heart starts beating again. That wasn't good. Toru ended up being paralyzed for a while. But the woman's lips begin to move. He opens his eyes along with the woman and begins to come to life, asking if that was another world. As he was in a closet at that moment, she keeps walking, and Toru asks if he would have to explain. The girl asks yes, so Toru explains when he was a child. Her grandfather stopped her whole life with stagnation and asked to continue her treatment. He needed a lot of money, and that took him a lot of time. She asks if his grandfather left, and the girl remained quiet. Toru wonders if she still didn't recognize him. If they were, restoration could become the same boy he was before they left, and if that really comes in, that was his body. He would still have an old man inside him. The girl says that there is still something else. There was a boy near her. Toru stays quiet and says that he didn't hear anything like that and that something should stay like that. She starts to laugh, then turns around, saying that Toru didn't change his habit as always. Her name was Sora, and she jumps to hug Toru, already saying that she had known about this for a long time and that it was all true. How much did she know about Toru's grandfather's stagnation? That's why she could always thank him for his restoration too, but she was surprised since it wasn't, and she didn't know it had been so long since his grandfather even lost his life. Sora thanks Toru for helping her, and is happy that he's okay. Toru also says thank you, that she's alive, while hugging the girl. She says that she is supposed to be his older sister, but it seems that he has grown too much, and he is already an older man. She cries, saying that she is surprised at how cool he has become, but it must just be her imagination. At that moment, Toru asks if she is hungry, but she ended up falling asleep, so they hugged for a while. Soon after, they ended up falling asleep, and Toru ended up waking up, seeing that Sora was watching him sleep. So, he touched her chin directly, which caught her attention. She prepares for a kiss while Toru tells her she was fine. Sora says that breakfast was already ready, and at that moment, Toru realizes that the lady has already met the owner of the room. Yes, even his introduction. Sora leaves the room, saying that Toru ended up waking up, and at that moment, she realizes that it was her first breakfast in 25 years. Toru asks her to be careful, while the lady of the house says that it was a very strange thing to say. Toru takes advantage of the fact that he is talking to the lady to apologize for bringing someone from his hometown so suddenly, but she says that it's okay, as they both have problems from time to time, and also that she was a trained adventurer who would give support to a new adventurer. Toru ends up finding that a bit strange, and soon Sora asks if she could become an adventurer. Toru says it was very hard work and it's nothing she can imagine. That's why she also wanted Toru's help now. She starts eating, saying it was very delicious. The lady says that this wasn't mole meat. Toru was trying to keep Sora away from the trauma of breaking what happened to their village, but maybe he's starting to get older, so Sora everything is kind of new too. Well, as they were finishing breakfast, it was time to record the Sora as a new adventurer, and she gets excited about all of this. But first they need to do something. So, she apologizes to the lady, and asks if she could borrow her armor as an insurance policy before she could buy one for Sora, as he won't be gone long, but the lady says she hasn't used her armor for a long time and asks if that's a problem. Toru says that she would take care of the armor. When the lady brings her armor, she notices that the cloak has turned yellow, and her breasts have also started to get a little damaged, and asks if everything is okay. Toru ends up touching the armor while Sora thanks her a lot for lending it to her. At that moment, Toru uses his restoration, which ends up remembering the memories of that armor and the fights against the dragons, among other things, and so the armor ends up returning to normal. The lady is happy about that, asking what that situation is. Toru says that that is his restoration ability and apologizes for ending up surprising her. But then Sora ends up putting on the lady's armor while Toru just watches. The lady says that it looked perfect on her and was very good to make Sora start right from the beginning. So, they leave the inn, and at that moment, he ended up walking down the shopping street. Sora was asking if today was the festival because there were so many shops there. Toru just asks her to be careful. The shops are open every day because there are many people living on that edge of the city. At the center of the world, there is a great miasma called the Enormous Abyss. The miasma that comes out of that place ends up covering all the islands and breeding grounds for many monsters. It was polluted by the cursed island and has no more inhabitants there. Only 50 monsters screaming about it in order to claim the lost island. The base was built on the border between the cursed island and the area where humans live. That was called the City of the Edge. Toru says that there was also a troop station there. However, the large groups of soldiers that participated in the battles The minimum number of skills were obtained from points by defeating the monsters that appeared. That was why there were only a few elite adventurers too. It seems to me that they end up arriving at the adventurer's office and say that Sora could go there alone. She asks why Toru couldn't show up. He told her not to worry and that he will watch from a distance, so his consequences won't be suspicious at all. Sora remains silent. Then, she says that her stomach starts to hurt and that she would be fine if Toru showed up to take her to that building. Toru notices that the people back there are murmuring about them, so he says that he will be young just that once and that he would take her to that place. But Sora says that he doesn't need to change his whole look, but it's because people don't have a good view of Toru, and with him around her, he would have a bad time. Sora asks if he did something horrible, but Toru says it's just his age, and that now he looks like an older man. So, if he was a very low-class adventurer, it wasn't a position to be very proud of. But Sora was proud of Toru, and even asked his little old lady that it was difficult to be an adventurer. It's impossible for a normal person to do this for 25 years, and it was pretty amazing that Toru hadn't given up yet, even though he's an old man. But Toru was a nice old man, so it was okay. They end up smiling, so they go inside that place. They say they were in need of magicians, a group of letter-rank adventurers, and they also need a water user rating of D or higher, and that someone should join in at least 2 days. Then, she asks what that was for Toru, and it was the contact board between adventurers that can write your request or the invitation to the group. Then, she asks if Toru has ever written anything there, and that he never really needed to write anything. So, going in a little further, some adventurers were drunk. They were there at the reception while Toru and Sora were going in to talk to the receptionist. The woman ends up welcoming Toru and asks what was bringing him there so early. In fact, Toru says that he brought someone new with him who wanted to know something. So, Sora ends up introducing herself, saying that she is not an adventurer yet. The receptionist asks if it was Toru who brought her there, and asks what the relationship between the two was. Sora says that they plan to become a couple, but Toru ends up covering her mouth, saying that she is from the same village as him, so he ended up taking care of her, and that was it. Soon after, she fills out the entire registration form at the reception, then realizes that she is 17 years old and asks if she could touch where she was at that moment. Sora asks what that was, but it was an item called a soul analyzer that would examine all of her abilities. At that moment, she ends up touching the crystal ball, and a branch ends up emerging from inside that ball before appearing there. Toru confirmed Sora's skill tree as time continued. It was a skill of his and had much more detail than even the soul analyzer. So, she can reverse the effect or attack of her target. The receptionist says that was a rather rare trick, that magical ability of reverse had never seen anything like it before. And even in her village, she only used it once. She used it on any attack that could return. So the receptionist asks, "Will it be anything?" Sora says that if the attack is not so fast, she can return it. But soon, he ends up remembering something from his past, when a monster attacked him. And Toru ends up realizing this and becoming sad. But soon, she is given confirmation that she is an adventurer. So, they go out, saying that it looks a lot like Toru's, so they were matching. So, now she's an adventurer, just like Toru. But that bunch of drunks appear right behind them, clapping, and say that it was perfect that the girl had registered as an adventurer, and that they were looking at a female mage, and asked why they don't leave Toru aside. This joins their group, since now he would have something better. Toru says that they should go home, but the drunk man says that they were not talking to Toru at that moment, and even prepares to throw a punch, but Toru dodges easily and ends up touching the boy's shoulder, which ends up making him fall to the ground. The other two ask what Toru did, but he ends up touching the other two, and they also fall to the ground. Sora asks what he was doing, and Toru says he restored them to the state they were in when they were almost completely drunk, then asks Sora if everything is okay, and if there is anything else he should do. After all, they will meet many more people than those three, but there will also be difficult fights against monsters. In fact, Sora says she wanted his help, and that she was very happy, and that they could talk again. In other words, she asks what Toru's dream was, and that she should tell him everything she could do to help him. Toru says he wanted to go far away. He'd been walking through the same forest for 25 years. Sora asks if he doesn't want to live life differently, to which Toru replies no, and that's why he wants to keep adventuring. Sora ends up inviting Toru to adventure together, and from that day on, the single-handed adventurer managed to secure a group. The next day, the two go to the monster forest, and there Toru ends up demonstrating some skills. For example, he ends up pointing his sword at a point on the ground, and behind him, a huge mole ends up appearing. Sora ends up telling Toru to be careful, but he ends up dodging the attack while fighting back and counter-attacking the mole, which ends up knocking it to the ground. Sora asks if it's gone, but Toru says it hasn't yet, but next time he should think about whether she can use her ability. And then Sora tries to catch it that next time. Toru prepares again, and the mole tries to attack with all its might, and by the time Toru looks, the mole is already above his head. At that moment, the animal reverses everything, sending her flying backward, feeling the impact of her own impact, breaking her nails and horn. And at that moment, Sora asks if that was a horned mole. And yes, but in reality, she must have overdone it. She used the ability too much at that moment. Sora apologizes, but Toru says he can restore everything, and feels that in the restoration, the mole was as good as new. The lady asks if he ended up reviving the animal, but that was impossible. The soul ends up being only that of the god of creation, and all Toru can do is restore the body back to how it was when he was still alive. Toru ends up taking the animal's horn, restoring it, and taking the other one, and so on. And Sora says that he would be stealing, but Toru says his family has grown, so he'll have to increase his income at least a little. He's fine, because he won't look suspicious, and Sora is happy to have listened to his family. Anyway, she was surprised to see that Toru was dodging really fast, but it was just that he was restoring his body here and there, and the more he was taking ownership of it, the faster he was able to move. Sora then asks if, when he was touching her body all the time that day, Toru ends up touching her face again, which ends up leaving Sora a little embarrassed. But Toru was observing her skill tree, realizing that there was another one there, since she can understand the target space in detail. That one is activated automatically. The effect is small, and it seems Sora's ability ended up being enhanced more by the horned mole, since its movement was so strong. So, that ended up creating a new ability, an ability that can perceive space other than the time continuum. Sora had prepared for a kiss, but Toru had already left, and soon she asked if that was all, and Toru asked what had happened, but Sora got angry and walked ahead. Toru says that it seems that for now, and that would take 20 minutes, but the battle did not last more than 3 minutes, and it seems that soon they will open up to be able to go deeper into the forest than they thought. So, they decide to sit on a wooden log to talk a little and also eat, since they made something perfect for both of them. At that moment, Sora ends up trying to eat the meat. When she bites it, she turns red, because at that moment, she realizes that the meat was completely salty, so she decides to drink some water first. But in fact, Toru ends up teaching her that first, she has to use the knife to cut the dried meat into pieces, and then she should fold the meat around the cheese, like crackers, and eat it that way, and it would be much better. The lady says it was perfect. Soon, Toru asks Sora if there's anything that's caught her attention. In fact, she's surprised at how easy the path is, without the obstructed view, the vines, and the clipboards below, and it's making her vision very distorted. And the surrounding area was also growing too much, meaning it was exposed to plenty of light. At that moment, Toru says she was paying close attention, and that it felt really good. Then, he says that outside the city, the monster forest is an established area, and that they created a safe path around trees that would be away from the dangerous beasts. And now, on that street, they had to be careful, as it led into the forest and created other paths. For now, they knew this and needed high-quality wood. Sora then asked if they were forest clearers. Actually, they're more like terminators. It was something much more perfect. Then, he asks her how many skill points she has, and if she got the water. For now, since Sora defeated 3 monsters, she ended up getting 3 points at that point. Toru says that she actually got a point, because they defeated a mole together, so they both earned a point together. That point is divided by the names of the participants in the battle that were nearby. So, since she only got 1 point for the slime she defeated on her own, life was difficult. At that moment, the lady realizes that Toru was spending his 25 years adventuring just for her, so she decides to give him a hug, telling him that he is very cool. But Toru says that they should go deeper into the forest today, and once his abilities are restored, it was time to see what the monsters would name that forest. At that moment, they had advanced even further, and the wind was picking up. Toru noticed this, saying that the goblins always worked in groups of 2 or 3, that they were ready to attack at any moment, and that Sora should be prepared for anything. At that moment, one of the monsters ends up appearing in front of them to attack. The other appears behind to grab the leg, and the others also appear from the sides. Toru dodges the attacks and counters them all with his sword, knocking one back. This completely enrages the goblins, preparing to fight some more, but it's too late. Toru had already stabbed one of them in the eye with his sword, but the other didn't let it go. He ended up weighing down his friend's chest to advance with everything he had on Toru. And when Toru tried to attack, the goblin managed to dodge, stomping the ground with all his might and preparing for the next battle. But at that moment, the goblin's attack was reversed by mother-in-law, who ended up ending his life. When Sora looks closely, she realizes that these monsters are actually quite ugly, and Toru soon says that they should start directly with the left ear for a subjugation test. Next, the neck just below the jugular, and she was supposed to put her fingers in and feel for anything hard. When she put them in and felt for it, she managed to pull out a gem, which was also recognized as the goblin seed, and also a mana stone. That could be used for itself and could be a variety of combinations, like one of those stones in the mana stone exchange. The main one is the support pillars that go on the edge, and now they should hunt more of those monsters before the sun goes out. She asks if she won't get the meat to take home, but the humanoid meat was horrible, and no one wants to buy it, which is why it was such a waste of time. At that moment, they decide to return home after a long time, and the guards end up looking at the protagonist, realizing that he was there, asking how he managed to return earlier today if he was tired of collecting weeds and stuff. But Sora says good afternoon to the gentleman, saying that he was doing a great job watching that gate. The man asks Toru who that girl was, and if by any coincidence she was with him. Sora ends up thanking him, saying she was very happy that they took such good care of Toru. Right at that moment, the man gives Toru the finger, saying that this shouldn't be something new, and asks the other guard to say something, but his face is ugly, and he says that nothing would have happened. Toru said that now they should go to the butcher, and that way he could have the body part roasted that way. But there was a huge line inside that shop. But at that moment, he was in the line. A group of adventurers eventually show up, talking about the fight that was that adventure they were on. Then, they say they were surrounded, and everything was fine. One of the adventurers says that people were being held back a lot, and that they were running around a lot with their heads in a daze, and that they should start being more careful. Soon, one of these adventurers notices Sora in line and decides to talk to her, as Sora is incredibly cute in their eyes. Sora says good afternoon to everyone and tells them she was there to wait in line. Soon, the other adventurers say that everything was fine and that it was their fault for having such a loud voice. Sora says it seems like they're in a tough time, but the adventurers say they're not, and that it seems like they've been adventuring for a long time now. Sora says it's her first time being an adventurer. Right at that moment, the youngest says that if that's the case, their group had a free spot, and asks if she wants to participate, if she can kill the goblins. Everything was already fine, but the mage in their group asks why she was inviting everyone out of the blue. Soon, Toru appears, asking if she was finished yet. Sora welcomes Toru, and the protagonist soon announces that he was already accompanying her. Everyone falls silent. So, they head to the Adventurers Guild reception, where the receptionist apologizes for keeping Sora waiting and asks how her day was. Sora says it was a really fun day, that she really enjoyed it. So, today's results were many goblin ears. All the adventurers were perplexed by this, and now, for the subjugation of 2 forest slimes, 5 horned moles, 1 meat being excluded, and also the goblin, which was a total of 21 subjugations, and also the purchase of 57 mana stones. There would be no mistake. They give all the money to her, and now Toru says they should go home. Sora thanks the adventurers, saying it was kind of them to invite her earlier, and that she was supposed to tell them the secret to defeating the slimes next time. So, they leave, and the receptionist welcomes the next 4 adventurers, who approach, demonstrating 4 goblins. Soon, they take a large copper coin, and that is Sora's share. She was happy because she already had enough, but Toru said that the money she earned meant she needed a lot of things to be a girl. She then asked if those were funds for Toru's wedding, but he said no. So, she soon asks if they could explore the city for a bit. After browsing the shops for a while, she asks him what he wants to eat, and they soon decide on a delicious-looking kebab with sauce and honey. Soon, she says it's time to try, and they quickly grab 3 to eat. The first thing Sora does is hand 1 to Toru, who eats it from her hand. Then, after thinking about it for a while, she gets excited. It seems like something very delicious. Toru says it tastes really good since the last time he ate it, so they should try to eat more of that kind of thing. Soon, they say it was a memory. In fact, the other person approaches them, asking why they are eating so much, and that it could cause problems for them in the future. It was the inn's landlady who was there to talk to them. Toru said that this place was a place he wanted to go with Sora, and asked if he could see that part of the city. In the middle of this, they had been walking quite a bit, so they decided to rest. Soon, the lady takes them to a public bathroom. Sora has never taken a bath in such a large bathroom, and Toru says she was tired after the first subjugation. But Toru couldn't accompany her inside, so she asked the lady to accompany her too. But Sora doesn't care if they're going together, and Toru gets nervous. So, they each go into the bathroom they're supposed to, and after a while with the lady inside, they decide to start taking off their clothes to go to the bathroom. After a while, he waits outside for the girls to finish their baths, and Sora thanks him, saying that the bath was wonderful, and that it was also her first time. Her hair and skin were very soft. Toru then says she looked so beautiful that he didn't even notice who it was the first time. But the lady approaches to talk to Toru, saying that Sora seems to only have one pair of underwear. Soon, they decide to go to the factory store. The receptionist there ends up helping them to see what they wanted. The lady said she wanted to pick out some clothes for the two of them. She also said it was getting too hot, and that they should make something lighter, and that she would leave everything to the people who know how to do it. In that case, the receptionist ends up taking their measurements, while Sora decides to look around the store. The lady asks how long it would take, while the receptionist says it would take about 3 days for the girl, and 1 day for the man. Sora was looking around when she decided to pick up some fabrics, and Toru asked her what she was choosing, immediately asking which one was the best. Toru chose the one with a deal from heaven, and the lady knew it. Sora decides to buy the entire outfit there, that cloth to make the clothes, and the lady says it's 94 copper coins, and asks how long it will take to get that one. Soon, Toru ends up handing over some of his money, and says that if it was her he'd spend it on. Everything was already fine, so it was no problem. She soon thanks him, telling him she loves Toru. The woman is happy to hear all this as she puts a bow in her hair. The lady is happy that everything was okay at that moment, as she has always been that way, and asks if she was working a lot. Actually, it wasn't quite like the story Toru once told. Because of that, she can understand everything. She's always much brighter than she should be. But let's hope she doesn't have to do that too much. Toru was taking care of Sora when he asked her to be careful about what was happening. A frantic fight was taking place, so Toru decided to protect the girl with everything he had. He ended up cutting down both monsters there, and Sora became exhausted. Toru and Sora, from the first day they entered the journey, were increasing the number of subjugations they were trying to do. Sora asks Toru to use the restoration to improve their situation. So, they were looking for a herb, and it was one Toru was talking about. It was the material that could stop the bleeding if something happened, and since they couldn't grow this herb in the city, it was a good price to sell it for when they found it. Toru teaches her how to pick the plant, saying that she shouldn't just pull and cut it like that, and that she should cut from the top, so it can grow back within 3 days, and she can pick as many as she wants when she remembers that kind of thing. And it was only that one time of the year, so when summer ends, that would be over too. Arriving in town, the guard always treats them the same way. But then, Toru and Sora end up overlooking it. Toru says he had a good day this time, and a good collection, and that was enough to catch someone's attention too. Soon, they realize a group of soldiers is heading their way. Toru freezes, thinking what might happen, realizing he has a silver medal on his chest, which would mean he's of average rank. The knight asks if it was him while pointing at Toru. One of the guards says yes, and the other becomes completely irritated. Then, the knight says that there was an accusation that Toru was using a novice adventurer to pretend to be her guide, so he should follow him. Sora is confused, and Toru says that everything was fine and that it would be over soon. Meanwhile, the guard is shaking with rage, asking the other why he was doing this, as he didn't think he would talk to the security department. The other guard says that they are classified, and also that he is bigger than the other, and that he should treat him as if he were the landlord now and treat him with due respect. But the guard gets angry, saying that he didn't want to respect someone who comes from one of his friends, and that he shouldn't be laughing like that. Then, the man says that Toru was committing violations, and that it was wrong to report it that way, and that he was a knight, and that Toru was also a bush hunter. He was someone who should have been beneath them, but the guard slaps him in the face, saying that the old man is different from them both. He's been working hard his whole life to get things done, and now he's just going to get in his way out of jealousy. No matter how you look at this situation, the one who was lowering the level of the fight was simply that gentleman. And the gentleman retorts, saying that the guard told Toru to retire several times, but the guard said that because he was sure he was stubborn and would never abandon his position. But the man asks why the guard was caring so much about the protagonist, but the guard says that it wasn't the other man's problem to know that. He explains that when he was a beginner adventurer, a person who didn't know where he came from ended up being helped by a poor man who was there. And he can't believe that calling a classification average just for a guide thing. No matter how much these guys in the department might think, it was stupid. but they manage to move forward even as they head into a battlefield. Sora asks what kind of place it is, while Toru explains that it was a pseudo-miasma, a formation using mana stones that extended in all directions. Traditional martial arts and magic could not be activated until the opponents were monsters. Then, he could use the skills he learned in combat. The knight held up some wooden swords and ended up pointing at Toru. The protagonist tries to explain the situation a little, saying that Sora and he are in a group because they are from the same village, and they were planning to make her a solid adventurer, not using her. Then, the knight says that if Toru is really helping the girl, the two of them should prove their ability for this kind of thing. Toru just snorts, saying that it was fine, but that he didn't want to break his sword, so he asks if he could borrow one. Toru starts picking up some swords and can't feel which one is good. Soon, the knight asks how long it will take Toru to choose a sword, but asks if neither of them were good, and asks if the knight could match the sword of both. The knight becomes irritated, saying that Toru is just a small fry and that he shouldn't bother with such things. But soon, Toru hands over his sword. Toru says he can simply swing the sword with ease, but the knight begins to grow increasingly irritated, and from that miyama, the battle begins, and the knight prepares for combat. The guards around say that the knight's fighting spirit increased as soon as he started. So, the complete spirit ability was the fire god that was with him. The knight says he'll finish off Toru in just one attack. Meanwhile, Toru asks Sora to keep an eye out, as he'll do something new right then. The knight is irritated that Toru is going head-to-head with him just because he is a lower-ranked adventurer. So, he ends up underestimating the protagonist, and tries to attack with everything. But the martial arts of that knight cannot be used. Toru advances, hitting the knight's sword with everything, and on top of that, giving a final attack, which would end the fight in just one blow. The knight falls to his knees on the ground and can't scream properly. All the guards are confused about what could have happened, and Toru says that it was exactly that match. So he excuses himself while throwing the sword away, asks Sora to follow him and go home, and at that moment, the knight feels that his fighting spirit has returned. Then, he uses a fire skill. At that moment, Toru turns back, and the skill ends up being reflected with everything on the knight, who starts to have his hands on fire, and that ends up making him scream with all his strength. The guards didn't know what to do, so they decide to run to get some water, and soon the girl speaks, asking Toru what he did at that moment. Because when he finished lifting his sword, she realized that he was completely surprised, and the sword could not burn. Toru's attitude was also very deliberate, and she never saw Toru make fun of someone, and asks if there is something going on at that moment, to tell the girl the truth. Even Toru didn't intend to do this with this wooden priest, but he restored the knight's skill tree, and it was amazing that Toru could do this. But in fact, when he saw Sora's skill tree and his own skill tree, he had an inspiration to develop his own skill, to be able to make a career, and in fact, the past can see the skill tree, so the restoration can do that. So, Toru was trying to make his restoration stronger, so every skill point he should use would return as well. And they can restore the skill point and use it in the skill tree as many times as they want, and it was something amazing that Toru was doing. Toru says that this was how it normally worked, but there is a big problem with this, which is that there is only one segment line for their skill tree, and this makes them both sad. But Toru couldn't think much because it's not easy to think of a trick to use this. That's why he made the knight angry on purpose so he wouldn't notice all that. And it only worked because the sword was pure fighting. And the first time he used a wooden sword, he restored all the openings in them to seal the martial art. Sora asks if people will simply find out that Toru is strong and women will appear to him, but Toru asks her to stop. In fact, Toru is somewhat certain who sent that knight after them, and it should be a problem. But Toru should talk to them later. Sora asks if it was a woman, and Toru says no. The next day, it was night. Ricardo was walking alone. He walked down a street full of musicians until he reached an alley and entered a tavern. At that moment, Toru's face enters. He is well received by the people who were there, and two knights were there saying that it has been a long time since Toru attended, and if he was invited in some way, the other says that it has been a long time. Toru says that the two remain beautiful as always. This has been a long time that they look at them. Toru observes the two from afar, while the other knight asks if she was being ignored and was seducing. The other is something he likes. The knight, her name is Stratia. Toru says that the two were called Platinum Fire, and that they are the two strongest people who were drinking in a place as poor as that. But Stratia tells Toru not to say something so hostile about that corner, because they are so close in that way, because they learned from the same master, and the other one is called Nanessa. Soon, Toru receives a large glass of beer, and says that he also wants some potatoes and sausage too, and there it is delivered to him too. Toru ends up eating everything and says it was delicious as always. That's why, at that moment, Toru starts to listen to other people's conversation. A bald guy was saying that it was like he had said before, that he couldn't hold it in for long, that he was using that method. The two girls say that it seems like their master was angry, and the bald man keeps saying that he needs to use the money correctly to grow a little money, and so he can do the next thing he wants. That man's name was Dayton. But the man he was talking to asked what kind of thing was happening, because they had already discounted 30% of the finances just for the subjugation of the army, which was really expensive at that time, and the one who said this was Saku. Dayton says that he already knew that the army had no money, and that they wouldn't even be able to pay back the money for what they spent. But Saku says that he wouldn't leave him any money. Will they ask for more? The strategy at that time was a success, and brought a lot of prosperity to those who were there, just as the contract for money per act of classification would maintain that. Toru then asks what kind of strategy they were talking about. Stracia says that her master was talking about a long time ago when a light shone in the ruins below while they were drinking, and Toru says if he could interpret that kind of thing. Nanessa says that the strategy to recap the Northeast District that was down last year, and they were intending to do that the next day. That's why, that morning, the adventurers were very calm, and some high-ranking adventurers were called too. Dayton says that he likes to bet on this kind of thing, but that they shouldn't try too hard because here they wouldn't be robbed too much. But you say that it's not like he's excited to welcome new talent, but it's because he wants more excellent talent who actually has experience. He says this while looking forward, and Dayton asks if he would be picking some kind of fight with Toru because he really doesn't know who to choose, and Dayton asks Toru to say something back because there is no reason for Toru to be there if he is going to be humiliated. Saku says that Toru caught a girl with a reversing ability, and that Toru should let the girl go, but Toru says that he has something to consult with Saku about this and if he doesn't know what is between them at that moment. But Saku says that it is not worth arguing, that talent should be talent, and compared to the useless, it was a double-edged blade at that moment. But Nanessa tells her uncle that the words were very stiff, and the man opens his eyes wide, asking what happened to her neck. Nanessa, when she realized, she was already cured, and she is paralyzed, and asks how this kind of thing could have happened. Meanwhile, Stephanie was watching from a distance what was happening, and then looks directly at Toru. Then, she decides to remove the eye patch, saying that she would observe directly. Since she was cursed with a magical eye, she would take a look at what kind of technique was given to Toru. But when she looks closely, Toru ends up calming down, saying that it was his own doing. And Stratia says that Toru's resistance is very low, but that he should be calm about this kind of thing. Nanessa asks what Toru meant by that, and he says it means they're going to the restoration to bring her back without being hurt, and asks that if she doesn't like it, she could return it. But she says no, ends up thanking Toru, and says that she doesn't know how to express her gratitude. Then, Saku says that Toru was quick to heal deeper and older wounds, and what other things Toru could do. He said there were several things, so Toru should step down from the director position since he was old, and wouldn't need to do much about it himself. Dadan asks Saku to shut up and not say anything else at that moment. As long as their eyes are Russian, he will not send the director's hand to them. Toru ends up asking for another beer, and that he was in the mood to drink more than that day. Soon, Dadan asks what happened with the discussion, and at that moment he is paralyzed or sees that Toru was eating without mercy, and it depends on how long it was used. It seems that it was a very incredible skill, but Toru was too arrogant to comment on them. Dayton asks what kind of thing was happening there, and in that, Nanessa says that the director has something in his head. The director does not understand what happened, but when he is with his hair, it had returned. And Toru said that he went against the request and made him a little younger. And Dayton didn't know what to say and if he could really do a lot of things with that skill that seemed useless, and it was time for him to admit it. Saku was saying that Toru's only competence was to make them stay quiet because now he should take a look and interrogate Toru again, because if that ability becomes public, the magicians and everything will always want to appear to bother Toru, and that those who cause more problems in cases of this kind of thing growing, they would have to catch Toru again. Dadan says that if that is true, Toru should be locked inside the house, and that is why they should stay away from this. But Stratia says that Toru's destiny was to be removed, and that it was decided. That's why they can't enjoy the whole goodbye destiny, and that for him there would be two conditions. Toru's first condition was not to interfere with him and the girl, and the second is the elimination of those who try to interfere with him. And then Saku asks if there is any reward for him. Toru says that if he leaves for half a year It would show that he can reach the same position as the other two, and the girls think that is incredible, while Saku says that big words cannot be seen from a person who has such a low ranking, and that his hand would be ready to shake the other house. That makes Toru think about his life. Toru says that it was impossible for Saku to do that kind of thing, and that he was moving people, and he has nothing to nurture. He is very talented that would result in demand from other people. In fact, he has no stronger ranking than the two girls who were known as the Platinum Fire for the past 10 years at least. Dayton starts laughing out loud, asking for more to be said about them, his young people. But on the other hand, the director, who was already an adventurer and retired, has already lost a lot to create an intense flow that would grow over time. He must have found that strange, but Toru wasn't there to cause problems. He just wanted to maintain what he had already done. And Saku asks if he really doesn't have anything else to say, and why he doesn't give up and shows up at Mumu's house. But Toru says that he is always active and wanted to accept if he makes a very personal request. Dowden says he understands it seems that Toru still has some feeling that he wants to continue being adventurous, and how long Toru plans to do more of this kind of thing. Toru was planning to go as far as he could no longer take it. His desire was to move forward, and somehow he wanted to reach the same height as the other two. That was exactly what Toru wanted. Of course, the great miasma that was in the labyrinth below was the great title given to the two people who stepped on that land, the great hero. The girls say that that kind of declaration was incredible, that it made them happy, and they could be friends for now. Soon, Mina says that she would wait for an advance from Toru while they decide to toast. Dadan says that it was incredible, and that Toru should be the adventurer he wants to be, and leave all the problems to him while smiling. Saku begins to judge by the way the night was tamed by Toru, and would be sure that Toru is hiding something. But by the terrible movement of the director said next to him, Saku ends up accepting Toru's conditions, and will tell his subordinates never to put their hands on the people that Toru has, would let him know his progress if something is extinguished, and Toru is happy that his proposal is accepted. So, he leaves a coin on the table, and says that now that the conversation is over, he will leave. Dadan asks why, and that the night has just begun. From now on, they could live their lives telling stories of the past, but Toru ends up leaving, while the people ask him to come back. Saku asks if it's okay to let him leave like that, and Dadan says that that guy has always been a stubborn person from the old days. He never listens to other people's words, and he's not easy to admit defeat, but that's not what it was about. With the heads left like that, definitely no one will be willing to take them inside the next house. So, that day they were preparing at that moment, and both Toru would have done a huge hunt. They wanted 2 huge pillars. They wanted to sell one whole, and divide the other into 2 parts. Sell the first part and leave the other for potions. Soon, Sora starts saying that he was hungry, and that they should go back earlier now to eat something. But Toru tells her not to be in a hurry, because there is a place he wants to go to buy something. They managed to get a lot of meat at that moment, and I'm sure that would be amazing to use to feed some things at that moment. Sora is confused, but when he sees what was happening, he gets excited. Toru puts some meat on the ground, and some cats appear to eat. But Toru ends up sitting on the floor, and apologizing for having appeared later. When Toru spoke of those guys, he was literally talking about those kittens, and Toru says that, yes, from time to time he always appears there to deliver some meat to them. And at that moment, Sora ends up touching one of them and asking if it was delicious, and Toru asks not to touch them while they are eating, because cats hate that kind of thing. But the cat was happy with that, and ends up jumping on top of Sora to ask for more affection. And Toru is surprised by this, while the other also appears to eat too. The half year spent meeting them, feeding them, simply didn't please them enough, and it looked too delicious. But when the cats go out to finish eating, Sora gets up saying that it wouldn't be delicious if they didn't eat together. But she feels something watching her and soon tells Toru that there is something interesting, and it seems that they are being watched. But Toru was too busy petting the cats, and right at that moment, Sora calls attention to Toru, saying that he caught something interesting. There was a boy who was nearby, and the boy looks closely at Toru after becoming quite confused. Toru gets scared and soon asks if he is the 3rd cat. Then, Sora soon asks what the child's name is, but she doesn't speak. She just says that it's not delicious to eat, and that she wanted to eat something delicious earlier. But how much time she spends watching the cats eating something, Toru letting the cat go forward to eat, but at that moment, Toru pulls him with everything, asking if he wasn't eating the food all this time. But the boy says it was his food while calling himself Mumu. At that moment, Toru asks where Mumu's relatives are, and if he is not interested in feeding children who are homeless because of that. But when he sees Sora's face, he is completely lost. Toru ends up closing his eyes and says that he would ask the lady if she can accept this kind of thing. Sora says that they would take care of Mumu, but the boy gets scared. He soon asks Mumu if he wants to eat something more delicious, and that it was decided. Sora ends up introducing himself, saying that he is a very cool person, while introducing Toru as well. Soon, the boy ends up catching Sora's attention, but he can't say Toru's name correctly and says that he is hungry. But Toru asks him to stop calling him that way. At that moment, when he arrives, he introduces himself to the lady, saying that he has some cute guests that afternoon. But soon Toru says that they ended up meeting and asks if he could leave him there for a while. Then, the lady says yes and asks if she wants the bath to be heated, and that would help a lot. The child ends up asking where the delicious food that was promised was, and Toru says that she has to clean the child first so that everything is perfect. At that moment, the child is cleaned. Sora then asks if it is not possible to clean with restoration, but Toru tried to do this previously, but nothing of his memories appears back, and it seems that the child has never encountered any monsters until now. So, he tries to do his best to do what they can, but it tickled the child and moved while he tried to clean. But it was strange, even though the child was dirty, he wouldn't have felt anything previously. And the one that was mentioned now, cats don't like water very much. Toru was extremely curious about those old injuries he had on his body, so Sora said that he had good violet eyes. It was a characteristic of the tribe's eyes, so Toru takes a lamp and places it in front of the child's eye, which ends up making it shine a lot. They have a very good vision of the darkness, and that was incredible. The lady says that she has some old clothes that she can use too, and the child soon becomes excited. Toru says that purple eyes tend to be much more incredible, and that it was a syllable for their name. The purple eye in the male tribe was used continuously by his men, while the female is used to repeat the syllables before that. The child's name was given as something with many syllables. That is, it is actually a girl, and because of that, they used the name of the god of thunder, because that could help them receive some mentions. And soon, the child ends up putting on the clothes he received, and managed to dress perfectly at that moment. So it seems very good. Mumu is happy about it at that moment. After that, he decides to eat, and since I was having a hard time currently, even Sora was starting to get very hungry. Soon, they thank for the food. Mumu ends up taking the meat with everything and eats it. It was very delicious, and soon they decide to continue eating. Even Sora says that it was delicious and that they should hunt tomorrow. Sora then decides to drink some water, and that becomes a very happy family table at that moment. The lady ends up thinking that Toru could have met these children earlier. And then, the lady asks if there is a problem for Sora because she seems strange, but she says that she noticed a little late, but the lady's ears were a little big, and maybe it is because she is from a distant tribe that came from another country. The lady's hometown was actually in the north, and heard what she has those ears that became big to hear better sounds that were seemingly out there. So, they apologize for that kind of thing, but that wasn't what they were thinking about. The ice god, he was very strange, and after all, they managed to grow a lot. Soon, the lady asks Sora if she knows about other cities. She says she knows a lot, but they grew up in a remote place in Central City, and the lady ends up saying that she would teach Sora some of these things, and she said that everything was fine at that moment. She says that a long time ago there was a very large city in the middle of that continent, and the city was extremely technological, with a civilization and people who lived civilized, peacefully, and prosperously. But 100 years ago, that distant place was swallowed by a big hole in the ground, and the city ended up collapsing. Several monsters appeared from the Great Abyss, and the population gradually became terribly chaotic. People had to flee and managed to end up going to the border region. Eventually, several places appeared, and people were being blessed with the powers of the 6 great gods. Zuma is a place of a red tribe and appears on the east side of the city, where some techniques of the god of fire are followed. Straw, where the tribe of long ears appears, and the city that is also of the god of ice in the center to the Great Hole. And the Great Abyss in the south has Regeneria, which is a green tribe that is also honored by the god of wind. In the southwest, there is the Blue Scale, the tribe that appears of the Federation that worships the god of water. In the southeast, there is the Brown tribe that lives in the mountains and has the god of the earth. In the northeast, there is the Purple-eyed tribe that follows the god of thunder. And obviously, in the central city is where both were born and where they live and are governed by their intense powers. You know, I was thinking about what kind of people the scale of 6 must have with that story. Toru says that it was basically visiting their previous life at that moment. The lady asks Toru what he was thinking of doing at that moment. The first thing was to give the girl some food, but it seems that she can stay a little longer, because he remembers that the person who helped him when he was a child also had the same eyes. The lady is very happy about this, so they decide to eat a little more. The next day, they go to an armor shop where the man says that it has been a long time since Toru last showed up. But Toru shows up there to make an order and asks if he is very busy right now. People usually neglect the maintenance of their equipment, so they bring it back, saying they want it to be brought back to normal, with a huge hole in the chest. So, in some respect, Toru has first-class equipment and treats it like it's first class, and it seems like it's always clean as always. So, it was to confirm that I said to ask for something. In fact, Toru was in urgent need of a pair of sneakers, and it seems that it was an order for the sneakers of the child who had something much bigger. Soon, Toru ends up introducing Mumu to the owner of the store, and although he seems scary, he is nothing. Passing by, ends up introducing herself as Toru's fiancée, and the man is completely scared of how they managed to get engaged and, on top of that, have a child. But he was just taking care of the child because of the things that happened. He ends up affecting it a lot and says that it will take a while to get the shape of her foot, so they decide to get the shape of her foot to be able to make a wonderful sneaker. The man says that, as a child could grow and would leave some space, and asks if it's okay for Toru. He says that it's something that should prevent the child's feet from getting dirty, and that it should be amazing. Then they could keep the sole as if it were a cat's well. The gentleman says he will use something lighter, while Toru was also looking at some cover that he could ask for. He wouldn't choose much, but the man says he forgot to sell that cloak. Soon after, the man asks if Toru was thinking of bringing the child along for the adventure, and asks to invite Toru to talk outside. While the child wonders what that was, that sign the man had made, Sora says it was something asking to come out. And then the man asks Toru what kind of thing he was thinking. It was funny for a child like him that he wouldn't last long outside. He should know what kind of stressful job that is. Toru says that even though the child is small, he is very talented. Soon, he says that he doesn't know what kind of person should believe Toru. But Toru asks not to tell anyone, because otherwise he would show his true face. So he decides to pick up some armor that was there, and says that he shouldn't touch that point. But Toru ends up restoring the armor back to normal. I asked what was happening, since there was no damage left on it. But the children who were inside didn't understand, as they could only hear the movements. Soon, the man says that he didn't understand everything, and that he can recognize that Toru has some traits, but nothing about that from the beginning. And I ask what Toru was doing. Toru explains that his ability is something he can do from now on, and the man asks if it was finally that Toru managed to do what he wanted, but that there is not much time for them to be happy. The resource to finish cleaning all that, he would become redundant. Toru tells him to be sure, and that he will become the adventurer with the guys. The skill can be used on humans too, so, to begin with, it won't be very easy to lose his life, and now he asks if the guy will still want to have that job. You say you're finally going to make a good product for children, and you have another item. Toru ends up improving another armor, and you're happy that the work was done for now. You ask what happened to the leather used for the repair, realizing that everything would become much more peaceful. It's more because of the restoration that Toru can do all that, but he will lose those parts, which means he can get something like dragon armor. But you say that it's not so simple to get, and there's also leather, which was very valuable too, because now there's a limitation on how much restoration can restore as well. He was looking at trying to restore a severed horn, but there is a limit to how many parts can be lost, around 30%, so he was trying with a small piece, but obviously Toru couldn't restore all of it, but he was sure that the brain would perform very well after that. Then the man says that Toru was saying only with a large familiar armor, and that he can somehow manipulate it to see the connections, and that Toru could come back here next time. He would be ready. They end up touching hands, and that ends their contract. Then they go to the adventure center. There, the same group of adventurers was talking about the old man, who was actually someone incredible. They heard rumors that he could actually fight head-to-head with an average rank, and if that is normal, no one can believe it. And they also heard that the child who was with him can also perform magical abilities that have never been seen before. Soon, they hear a child's voice, asking what that place was, as the three protagonists enter. The mage asks why there's a child with them, and perhaps that child is their daughter. At that moment, they say there's no blood relation, that the child was calling Toru father, and ask what was happening. Perhaps they really managed to make a child. Toru asks Mumu to be quiet for a bit, because that place should be a place for everyone to be quiet. Mumu soon realizes it's an adventurer's center, which she heard the day before was Toru's job. Sora says she'll show her around, while the child asks what that thing on the wall is. Sora explains that it was a board where everyone writes requests or groups to join, and then the child asks if she can write too. Sora says she can go ahead, but Toru ends up looking a little thoughtful. She tries to write but can't reach it, so Toru lifts her up, and the child begins to draw. Mumu draws a family consisting of Toru, the child, the cats, and even the old woman, but Sora isn't among them. They go to reception, and the woman asks why she's not there. Going to the adventurer registration desk, they realize the child is 9 years old according to the document, and ask if she's okay. The minimum age that should be required to become an adventurer is 8 years old, but the receptionist ends up being a little strange about it, and Toru says that she can be a magician too, and that she won't get close to any monsters. But the receptionist says she doesn't allow that. Ricardo decides to explain the moment. She says that there is no opening in the skill tree of the Purple Eyes group that has to do with the offensive attack, and assuming that her initial skill will be the electric sense, the zero electric sense, only the possessor could detect the non-sorted monsters that would grow as an adventurer, so she cannot guarantee permission for this, and it is because she does not even have a skill point. But Toru says the receptionist should just stay calm, because she'll understand when she tests it, so she freezes. The child then should put her hand on the soul analyzer, and that's what Mumu does. Even though she's part of the purple-eyed group, she possesses an incredible ability, which leaves the receptionist paralyzed, and Toru simply worried. She explains that Mumu actually possesses the ability of the electric spine, a magical ability that counterattacks whenever the user is attacked, so it must be the result of gaining some skill points. The receptionist is perplexed by this, and at that moment says that she will prepare the adventurer's identification, while Mumu makes the same gesture that she saw Toru do with a friend of his, and then he's holding his hands, and Mumu takes out his adventurer's ID. They could have started hunting and asking where Sora might be, but she was still at the board, still drawing, and Sora had finished the drawing she was doing. Mumu just watches from a distance as Toru calls out that they're ready. She had drawn Sora herself on the board along with their family. The next day begins with Mumu preparing to launch an attack. She was practicing her thunder skills, and Sora says it was beautiful. Toru explains that the magic is called Lightning Spine, and that, if attacked, it would simply counter the attack. Soon, Mumu explains that the pain stopped a little after doing that, and it felt like he was contracting a pain. Toru was putting his hand on the child's head, giving the electric spine an evil eye. The level was 1, and the usage rate was 5 per hour. The status was bad, and the duration was 5 minutes. When Toru uses restoration on these openings in the electric spine, the level returns to 0, and he notices that the trunk of the wood was changing shape. She's had that ability since birth, a total of 3 entrances, and the one that was getting bigger. Well, Toru explains that the next step was to look directly into his eyes. Sora asks if they were trying to replicate the same thing that happened the first time they met. But Mumu stays quiet. Toru asks what happened, as she was very energetic some time ago. Mumu asks if they won't get mad at her. Sora can't quite understand, and Toru says it's okay, that no one will get mad or anything. In fact, everyone would be happy if the child could do that. Even she asks if it was true, and Toru tells her she doesn't need to worry about it. So, the child tries using this ability again. Mumu sees that a strange tree has grown there, and Toru is happy, saying that she could see the trunks. When you look at the trunks, you realize that there is an ability to call upon the sense of sharing, which shares feelings and senses targeting the person, their expressions. Given this, perhaps it was because she was struggling in certain ways to survive, as she survived on cats. It was rare to find someone naturally with an instrument instead of a soul. The people around her must have treated Mumu like a naughty child. Toru tells her she was doing great, and they hug, while Sora just watches from a distance. Then, Toru tells her to try again, and asks if she notices the 3 trunks that were sticking out of the tree. Mumu explains that she sees, and to raise them, they should pour some water on these logs, and that's what Mumu does, causing her abilities to begin to grow and transform into wood. Thus, she has the ability of electric radar, which shows the direction and distance of the enemy around them. Soon, Toru asks if she's going to use the ability. Of course she is. So, Mumu prepares and uses her electric sense ability, shouting in all directions. The electricity passes through all the trees and goes everywhere, and she senses something around them. Then Toru asks to take a look. Sora, from afar, asks what was happening, and why she now has 2 abilities, and why she didn't get everything. Soon, Toru explains for a while, and Sora is stunned to discover that the child had 3 loose ability parts. Meanwhile, Mumu has found the animal she'd sensed, a slime in a tree. Toru then holds the child so she can perform her first assist, which involves hitting the slime's core. Toru says she needed to hit the spinning ball inside the slime, and when she does, she praises her. Mumu asks if she did well, and Toru says yes, that everything was fine. It was much more convenient than he thought. A very limited ability. That was, he caresses her, telling her that she did well, and that her sister won't miss it for anything. The child is speechless. Soon, Toru asks if Mumu was doing well, and that the next one would be difficult. Maybe there was a problem. Mumu says she has nothing to do with the problem at that moment. So, they decide to go back to the tree and take a look at what had happened, looking at those trunks sticking out of the tree and those branches prepared. Toru tells her to throw some more water into the biggest one there, and that's what she does, realizing that now Mumu would gain the Thunder Needle ability, which increases the user's skill and agility. So, he asks her if she wants to try it, and that's it. She uses her ability, feeling that her body is lighter and much more peaceful. But Sora realizes that it seems very painful at that moment, and that it was perfectly fine. Toru decides to ask if she's in any pain, and Mumu says everything is fine, that she just feels very strange. So, Toru picks up some rocks from the ground and decides to throw them at the child so she can dodge them. She manages to dodge the first stone with ease, while Toru throws the others. The child also begins to dodge, and so Toru begins to throw many more stones, creating a near rain that the child dodges masterfully. But Toru throws one last rock very close to the child, and she dodges it without any problem. Sora tells her she did a good job, and the child also says she managed to do something with a new power. Toru says that everything was calm and that he did exactly what he thought it would be at that moment. Toru asks if she could share that power with Toru. The child says it's fine, but she just doesn't know how. Toru says that perhaps she's never used the opposite of the sense of sharing, and the child didn't understand at first. Toru was thinking that she never shared her feelings with cats either, so it was time to put that aside for a bit and ask why cats aren't on the same status. Mumu explains that they're always together, and that's why Toru explains that they're sharing something. Then, soon, Mumu understands a little. He walks attentively, and the abilities begin to be shared. Soon, Toru asks if she can close her eyes and cover her nose and ears, and transfer the effect entirely to Toru. She says she can't do all of that and tries little by little. At that moment, Toru felt it was the perfect spot, using his full ability. He bounces back and forth with the child, while the woman asks if she could use some, and if it's okay to share it with her too. Mumu says it's too early to use it too, but she says it's not fair and that she can share it with her. But Mumu was hungry, and Toru gives her a fruit to eat. But Korra grows sad from a distance. So, they decide to go to the official adventurer's place and hand over all the subjugation they had there. The receptionist is on a much bigger adventure. Toru realizes that Mumu's use of the electric radar and the thunder needle ended up increasing the chance of them encountering more enemies, allowing subjugations to happen more quickly. So, Toru ends up with a silver coin, a half-silver coin, and 37 copper coins. So, they decide to leave. Recently, the number of monster hunts hasn't been doing them any favors. However, at the same time, Toru somehow manages to kill them, and she manages to get through 50 monsters a day. She can't understand how this is possible for just 3 people each. Soon, night falls, and Toru is carrying the child. He decides to talk to Sora, walk through the forest, and hunt all the monsters. The days end up becoming very exhausting for the child. Sora says that Red is really amazing, that she can manage to use the skills and switch from one to another without thinking about the fact that she recently learned them. When Sora uses inversion 3 times, he runs out of magic and finds it very difficult to breathe. Toru says it can't be helped. She's different from Mumu. She doesn't have as much magical power available, which was a very important thing. It also depends on what kind of magic she's using. Since Mumu's electricity can repel enemies, she can continuously increase her power while mana is present. Even inversion can't be used unless attacked by monsters, which happens a lot if you can. In the middle of this, Sora said he could carry the child too, and that Toru must be getting very tired. But Toru said it was okay, and that when he got tired, he'd let her know. Sora says he can leave everything to her. After all, Sora really wanted to get along with Mumu, and Toru, speaking of which, says it's strange how much she dislikes only Sora. Perhaps, in the past, she even used the sharing sense of a girl who was Sora's age, and something bad happened between them. However, Toru tells Sora not to rush things and just take it easy. The girl says Toru was right and thanks him for also caring about them both. Soon, Toru has a request for Sora. She was sleeping with the cats last night. She says yes, and that the 2 of them showed up and ended up warming the bed quite a bit. Soon, Toru comes up with the idea of trading the cats for Mumu, so Sora could sleep with her. First, Those cats appeared after Mumu in Toru's room. However, in the middle of the night, they appeared looking for something in her room, and Toru is sure there's something in between. Sora says she understands and asks what she thinks about the cats and Mumu sleeping in her room, since it would be crowded. Sora could go to Toru's room, but he says he'll pass. The bed is too small, and it's too difficult to sleep. But she says it was a lie and that Toru could sleep peacefully in his bed. A few days later, at the main gate of Borda City, several knights were returning from an adventure, which caused several people to celebrate. Toru heard at the bar that some high-ranking adventurers were sent to a nearby town for a recapture operation. Meanwhile, in the monster forest, Toru was training with the girls, with some worms as well. At that moment, Toru prepares his sword, cutting one monster in half and slamming it into the other's back, causing the monster to scream. Sora tells Toru to be cautious, as the monster is poisonous. At that moment, Toru shares Mumu's ability, and Toru can use it with ease. Immediately after finishing off the monster, Toru prepares himself by looking at the other, but his faith explains that he's already finished off all the monsters nearby. Toru says that dealing with these monsters was difficult at first, but along with the electric spine ability, it was very good to use. Sora asks Mumu for help, making fire and burning the fur, but Mumu was too busy. She takes a crystal and places it near a piece of wood that was right there in a hole nearby, and places the wood on the ground, climbing on top of it, and realizing that there was something there. Soon it was a cart, and Mumu ends up trying to touch the fur of the monster that ended up there. But Sora tells her not to do that, as it would hurt a lot. But Mumu does it anyway. Mumu approaches Toru to take his restoration ability, and after doing so, the child feels much better. Toru asks Mumu to listen to Sora perfectly. Meanwhile, Sora approaches with a pile of wood, saying that Toru is looking like a father now, and that it's time for him to get a really cute wife. But Toru ends up ignoring him, saying that now it's time to get the fur from that monster they just killed. At that moment, they make a fire, and Toru tells Mumu to be careful not to get burned. While Sora explains that fire would be cool to put on all of this, they also try to put it on the monster's back to remove some of the fur that was there. And that's what Mumu does, demonstrating that she can remove all of that. The monster's back is completely hairless, which could be used to place it on the cart and carry all three at once. It was a borrowed item, like low-grade magic stones, and was easy to carry around by hand. And then Toru decides to ask Mumu what she thought about that monster, and that the meat of those monsters was also good. Mumu says yes, and that now it was time to go home, and that she might be getting tired, and that Toru would carry her whenever necessary. The girl says everything was fine. Meanwhile, he arrived at the gate. The guard approaches the protagonist, asking where he found this child, saying he had been hard to find the day before. Sora soon says good morning to him, saying he did a great job. The guard hits on Sora, asking if she'd like to have dinner with him. Sora says everyone would be perfect to go, but the guard ends up denying that they're all going at once. At that moment, Mumu wakes up, asking if he's home yet. The guard asks what kind of child she is, since she wasn't from the city. When the guard tries to touch Mumu, the girl becomes upset and asks what kind of disgusting person he is and what he's doing to her. The guard introduces himself, but Mumu says the guy knows her name, which is a bit suspicious. Toru says it's indeed suspicious, but they head into town to go home. At that moment, the fourth says they're not finished yet. Arriving at the Adventurers Guild, they end up handing over everything they hunted that day and earning 2 silver coins and 18 copper coins. It had been a week since they formed a group with Sora and managed to collect 5 silver coins, which was the same amount that Toru had saved in the bank. The same applies to skill points. Along with Sora, he has around 150 points, and Mumu was close to 70. If they continue like this, they could both level up in 2 months. So, they decided to go to the shopping street, and there was a lot of food for Mumu, and everything was for sale. But if you don't have money, you can't eat. Mumu says that it was a bit wild, and Toru asks where she learned that word. Soon, Sora ends up handing the child some food, and she eats it whole. Sora also bought a skewer for Toru. Toru asks when they think she's actually familiar with that place. Mumu says it's very tasty, and Sora ends up mentioning that there are many delicious things there, but the child ends up ignoring her. Toru also explains that there's a bathroom nearby, and that they should go together. But Sora says she's not ready yet. Toru doesn't understand what she's talking about and says they're just going to take a shower. But Sora explains that the girls have their own things too. Toru finally understands and says that if that's the case, they should go back and get some food, and then be able to go home. But the lady goes with them, which makes her go straight to the bathroom. When they enter, Mumu tries to go with Toru, but Sora ends up pulling her, saying that the girls should go separately, and so, they go to take a bath. As they leave the bathroom, they realize Toru is already waiting outside. He asks if Mumu behaved well. She says yes, that she was also very strong, and that next time she won't lose for anything. Sora says she was feeling fresh and wanted to do her best tomorrow. But Toru says they have a day off the next day, and that maybe he forgot to talk to her about it. Meanwhile, Toru ends up remembering a conversation he had with Dadan, who had asked the protagonist for help. Toru would have to repair the entire wall eventually. Dadan asked the Earth God, but they wanted 10 gold coins. The god explained that if Toru couldn't make a good vessel for him, he would also give him all the magic stones they had previously used. Toru wonders why Dadan would be asking this so early, but it's been 9 years since the town was attacked by the monsters. Everyone was slowly forgetting about it, and they had no sense of danger. 9 years ago, the feeling of loss was something Toru wouldn't forget, but he says it was okay. However, if he completely fixed it, it would be bad, and they should take it slow first. Dadan reminds him that he was counting on Toru perfectly, and says that the main forces are now on an expedition to a nearby town, and there are some reports coming from that town. Toru asks if the number of monsters has increased, and Dadan says that's exactly what happened. Even with Mumu's electric radar working properly, the monster numbers have still been very high for a few days. Dadan says he knows very well that it was the only thing he could do to help someone in trouble, but he doesn't really care to share if that would protect the people of that city. Toru says that he is the only one who bought that and that Dadan shouldn't worry, and asks if he can leave now. He ends up saying he can. Meanwhile, Dadan says he managed to stay at Saku's house since that day, and had a nightmare due to a curse from his conscience. He was being crucified by several people and stayed there all day. After all this happened, however, things were back to normal. We then go back in time a bit, where Toru remembers the last line Dadan said to him, which would leave all the repairs in the protagonist's hands. Sora went shopping with the lady, so Toru had to repair the wall together with the girl, but it was worse than he imagined. Meanwhile, Toru asked Mumu not to go too far, as he would be working on the wall there. She said it was okay, and in the meantime, she was playing with the cats, walking over there. Toru says that even a child is made this way, and it makes everyone very happy. But Toru didn't know where to begin. He thinks of the walls that surround the entire city. There's an entry point in the wall under the city. They stepped out of the monster forest, and it's just to the left. And another end has the main gate that connects with the highway that goes to the front of the city. And inside there are 2 districts, the inner and the outer, which are separated with an abnormal opening connected by a bridge. Furthermore, when it falls there, the fountains are destroyed. So Toru decides to start with the most damaged parts of the wall. The damage is only intensities that have been attacked by various monsters several times in the past. Toru can't escape while using restoration. It's impossible for him to fill a massive hole in one area once, so he decides to go back 10 years and ends up using his ability. He can easily see the difference. He should be able to do something better the way he was using it. Maybe he'd have to use the same skill multiple times. He'd love to have a way to orgasm better, but his skill can only be used in special circumstances. The effect is reduced because it is used so many times, and it is allowed to attack many monsters at once, but it was horrible because of the demand it has. Toru, and maybe he would have tried other things. He's tried restoration in many situations, and remembers very well his hunt for the large monsters on the last day, that pain that appeared out of nowhere. He realized that by searching through consciousnesses using keywords, he could search for many things, and by looking at the memories on the wall, he could choose the best one to protect the city. And by doing this many times, he managed to take 50 steps. Soon, Mumu approaches, asking if Toru has finished his work, and if he still has plenty of things to use for the restoration, so she could play a little more if needed. And that's what Mumu does with the cats, since he was expecting it. Maybe he'd tried using an iron sword, and that's what Toru does. He removes the sword from its sheath, realizing the weight is nothing like a wooden sword. But if he can't hold the sword, he can't get out of the way. And by going through the night, he managed to repair the north wall in a day, and now the south wall was next. But he needs plenty of rest first, so he decides to return home. There was the lady, Sora, and Mumu, and the cats too. Everyone was getting ready to eat, and the next day, they went straight to encounter an armed boar. Sora said it sounded interesting, while Mumu said she could leave it entirely to her. But Toru explained that these armed boars were enormous beasts that could reach heights no higher than a human shoulder. It wasn't easy for an opponent to fight head-on. His smoke was at level 1, and so were his magic arts. That wouldn't normally do much damage. Level 2 or 3 skills are required, but that can't be done while learning observation. Defeating these monsters would promote them to the next rank. Then Mumu understands that her card has turned blue, and she really wants a blue card. Toru says everyone wants one. So he prepares for attacks, while Mumu uses her abilities to search for the armed boar. Mumu uses the electric radar for the next 2 hours. She finds something else, and Toru covers her mouth. That was actually a nest of goblins that were starting to emerge. And at noon, there was another classification of goblin that was a subspecies. You don't normally see this subspecies on the surface, and if it were like that, everything would probably break into pieces. The goblins keep coming out of that hole, and the more time passes, the more they appear. So there must be a dungeon nearby. Mumu asks what it is. Toru explains that a dungeon is just a hole in the ground where strong monsters live. You can see that this appears inside the Great Abyss, and to expand the area outside of what was created, the deepest points are what they call a black hole. That black hole has all the dungeons, but the first one is the theory that was linked to the Great Abyss. The labyrinth is protected by a king, and it's the same thickness coming out of that black hole that leaves it that way. The number of monsters would continually increase, and that would be the broken case. The other is that the surface monsters are not exterminated. They are from other territories, forced to roam the surface. In the worst-case scenario, the monsters of the underworld could live together, and the monsters' surface territory could also be taken over, which would result in the occurrence of two broken. Mumu asked if they could fight those monsters, but Toru said it was impossible. Just 3 of them wouldn't stand a chance against that many monsters, and all they could do now was tell them they might know. There are 3 lumber mills near the forest, but they don't have enough time to tell them all. Toru says it's time to run, and tell everyone there's a monster nearby. Soon, Toru picks up a pyramid and sets it on fire. Mumu asks what it is. Toru explains it's a reward for repairing the wall, the incendiary incense, and the cylinder. The incendiary incense has the smell that monsters hate, and that should work for these monsters that were appearing out of nowhere too. Toru ends up setting fire to it and throws a rock at the monsters, which attracts their attention. He then throws incense to see if he can delay the monsters' departure. They were alert, but after throwing the incense, Toru simply ran off. Meanwhile, some adventurers were approaching, and they were saying it was too early for them to go. However, one of them was stubborn, saying he was too quick to attack. The last time they'd seen something like this, they couldn't have been so lucky. But the adventurers were scared. They didn't know what to do now. The girl asked where they are going with all this, and that they are always like this. So, he asked the leader if they could do anything. However, the leader says he can't. At that point, just letting them fight is how these guys operate. But even though there is some light from those words, their group was not as it was in the beginning. He can understand everyone's frustration and irritation. A few days ago, a certain girl showed up, and the compliments she gave them on the first day were beyond their comprehension. From that day on, the group's atmosphere changed somewhat. The group were childhood friends, and together they left the village for the city of Borda, and that's how they met the magic user. And by the middle of that year, they had managed to form a group. Life was rich and full of expected rankings, and it was simply a matter of doing their best to make it all work out. However, they don't have any special talents from the beginning, and after thinking so much, they begin to feel tremendous fear. Soon, the magic user was at a loss for what was happening in front of them. There was an armed boar, and it was staring directly at these adventurers. It was much larger than normal, and it even seemed to have more legs. The youngest boy approaches and steps in front of everyone, saying he'll charge at this monster. And as he does, the boar just watches. The boy jumps to try to attack with everything, but he can't even scratch the animal, which ends up kicking the adventurer with everything, throwing him backwards. The group starts screaming in fear. Meanwhile, the man is already on the ground and tells them to run, but it's too late. The boar was already pouring over them. The leader saw the rest of the 2 running away. However, the archer asked what they were doing at that moment, but it was too late. The leader ended up jumping on the boar to lure it to the other side so the 2 could run. If that earned them a few attacks, maybe they could buy some time for the group to run. The magic user was trying to heal the adventurer who was attacked, but it seems that his life was no longer there. Just as she was about to think, shouting that she couldn't heal that boy with level 1 water healing magic, she heard a noise coming from behind her. It was the leader who had taken one of the boar's horns and pierced it through his body, throwing the leader to the ground. This couldn't be true. The girl begins to cry. Meanwhile, the leader says he needs help, but he is thrown to the ground and slammed into a tree. In the end, he remains motionless, and that makes the girl paralyzed, not understanding what was happening. The boar watches the girl from afar and lunges at her. However, the boy who was on the ground gets up, urging her to run. This girl didn't want to leave him alone, And just then, an arrow came from a distance. It was the archer, who hadn't noticed until now. It hit the boar's forehead. The boar comes at the archer with all its might. The boy was lost, but he managed to hit an arrow, which was enough. Their legs can't move anymore, and when he goes to attack, he dodges downward. The boar charges at them with all its might. He feels his leg. The boar comes charging toward him, but by that moment it was too late. The magic user screamed at the top of her lungs, but the boar charged at him. When she looked back, the boy was already crushed, his arms and legs broken. Noticing the lifelessness in the boy's eyes, the girl asked what was happening. It was unclear what was happening at that moment. Previously, just a few minutes ago, they had been a group of 4. She begins to feel bad. She's used up all her magical power, and he'll only be the last. She'll give the last drop of water she has to the children, so she can live in their lives. Then she uses her healing magic. As she rises to dance over the archer and try to heal him, she begins to tremble. Meanwhile, the boy on the ground wonders who was there, and if perhaps it was the god of death. The boar looks back at the magic-wielding girl, but a hand touches her shoulder. It's Toru, telling her she did well and that she can leave now. At that moment, she begins to cry, and Toru steps forward. The boy finally gets up, asking what happened to him. The magic user begins to understand. Toru delivers the message. Sora should leave the group together to heal everyone at once. Meanwhile, Mumu should lend some of her power to Toru. He had no problem. Mumu lends her power with all her might. Toru runs and ends up healing the archer from a distance. The magic user just watches. Toru ended up irritating the boar. The boar tried to keep up with Toru's speed, but he was too fast. And with that, Toru helps the group leader, who is paralyzed. Toru advances on the boar and prepares. When his iron sword stops cutting, but when it hits, he simply dodges. Toru realizes he'll need more power if he wants to do anything. And when he looks back, he realizes there was a tree that was cut in half. He runs toward it and uses it for support. But as he approaches, the ability seems to have vanished, and so he dodges under the boar. At that moment, the boar launches himself with everything he has and hits the tree with everything he has, putting his head through the tree. The magic user is perplexed by this, while Mumu says that Toru is amazing, as he is faster when the thunder is activated. Toru begins to tremble. Meanwhile, the adventurers ask what happened. The magic user falls to the ground crying, saying she doesn't know what happened. Mumu pets the user, while Toru sticks his sword straight into the boar's back, which makes the boar scream and close its eyes. Without a shadow of a doubt, they didn't have to evaluate anything. His legs were too long. The group leader eventually approaches Toru and apologizes. He is very grateful for being saved, and Toru says it's no problem. He just wanted to hunt that kind of monster. The leader still asks why he was saved at that moment, but Toru asks the boy to be quiet and says that it doesn't matter how he looks at it. This monster has many legs, and it wasn't normal. It's called a special gene. Toru had seen this monster earlier without hunting. The number ended up increasing, and because his territory was close to the mutation, it was a phenomenon that was happening. Specially tempered individual versions. These versions are called special genres. This means that earlier, Toru had stumbled upon the goblin cave, and they were ready to attack. Toru apologizes, but asks the boys for help in overcoming this. The other adventurers asked if this wasn't a big problem, and it was indeed huge. The user asks the leader what he thinks, and the leader says he'll follow Toru. And everyone agrees. Toru says that first they have to get out of there. It's the territory of the armed boars. At the end of everything, Sora asks if they are going to leave their house there, and they ask if he doesn't want to eat their meat. But they first had to go back, and so they started running. They went straight to the 3 sawmills that they had located in the north and south, and then they went to the forest path. And in the middle of this, they started running to the south and separated from the other adventurers while they were going to the north, pulling Mumu in the cart. Arriving at the North Metalworks, the metalworker ends up saying that it has been a while since Toru has been. And in this, the protagonist explains that there was a cave of goblins that were coming out nearby, and it was really a very dangerous situation. The man says that it was not possible that this would happen. So he uses his whistle and says that they are going to come out and should be evacuated, that the hole was growing bigger and bigger. The town must have known about this, so they made a smoke signal. Toru said they should get out of there first and wanted to watch his back, so they ran off. The boys and the other adventurers somehow managed to tell the rest of the locksmiths. So, running there, they can see the wall, which doesn't take long for them to get there. Toru approaches. Even though they let the city know, there was no blue smoke from a day via the tower, and most of the guards were also sent to another city, which totally affects what was happening. When Toru sees everyone entering the city, Mumu asks what happened. This, Toru can no longer walk and wonders if they want him to carry him. Sora says he can't do that. Then Toru says that he has some work to do, and that they should come first and stay close to the innkeeper. Sora asks if they should protect the innkeeper, but no, it wasn't necessary. That person is 100 times stronger than everyone there, so he wants them to stay by her side, because she is the strongest. But Mumu's face is sad, and Toru approaches, saying that he needs to take care of some things now, and that she should be a good girl and wait for him. Mumu asks if she can't go with him, and Toru says no, that he would be back as soon as possible and apologizes, but he would let Sora take care of her. Mumu just agrees, and Toru says that she is a good girl, and that he would see her later soon. Sora asks him to be careful, while the city guard approaches asking where the protagonist was, and she explains what was happening, and the guard says that he still has things to do there as time like this, and says that the red smoke means that something bad was happening, but he is run over by Mumu's cart, who asks what was happening. Mumu explains that he should get out of there because he is very suspicious and leave Sora alone, but she says that everything was fine, but that the situation was bad. Many goblins were coming out of a cave, but he says that was impossible. The goblins' cave was taken 10 days ago, and if it was in the new hole that was happening, this should take a month, but it was hard to believe that Toru would make a mistake like that. So it really must have been a bad situation. The guys hadn't returned from the South Sawmill yet, and the blue smoke was rising, which means something must have happened to them. The guard decides to run away, saying that they need to get ready, but Sora tells them to wait, and that she will help with whatever is needed. The guard says that Sora can't go. She is a young girl, and it hasn't even been 10 days since she became an adventurer, and that the hole was really something she couldn't help, and yet if something happened to her, Toru would just finish it off for sure. So Sora thinks that at least she could guide people to the path inside the forest. Meanwhile, Sora asks Mumu for help, because she has something she needs to do, and asks if she could go home alone. The girl says that arguing was useless, and that Toru ended up lending Sora to Mumu, and it was her job to take care of the girl. So, inside the forest, Sora starts helping the people, saying that they should run to the city. But at that moment, the metalwork staff realized that she was a very low-ranking adventurer, and asked her to run into the city because the monster was nearby and she couldn't be alone. The guys said it was their fault, and that they didn't believe the four who showed up with the danger, so they ended up escaping separately. After all, one of them had a huge hole in the shield, and it seemed like it had become a smoke signal from somewhere else. They realized what was happening and escaped in panic, and when they were running, they ended up seeing another monster that was on the other wall, and were attacked by this huge monster. Those four who were escorting them ended up drawing the monster's attention to escape, and Sora soon asks what happened after that. But they didn't know what had happened, and let the gate guards know about this situation, and that they worked with it somehow. Sora says that there is nothing they can do, and the locksmiths say that he could be cursed all he wanted, but it was the adventurer's job to take care of it, so they run to the city. Sora says that it was very frustrating when you can't do anything at that moment. And Mumu also had some things, which was just follow the instructions given by Toru. The lady explains that Mumu is a good girl, and there was some hair hole in Mumu's hair. And when she leaves the burrow, she ends up giving the girl a strange feeling. That was something she couldn't explain. It seemed like it was very good, and Mumu explains that she could do much more, and there was another one nearby that makes Sora play too. The girl ends up explaining that she became very close to Mumu, and at that moment, Sora explains here, it could also be used for Mumu's powers and could look with his own eyes. There is no doubt that the reverse speed could be very useful. Sora wanted to find a good way to talk about the feelings of love, but Mumu says that when she would become one with Sora, she might postpone the girl, but Sora explains that she wouldn't. Mumu asks if she won't be mad even if she doesn't feel good, but she says that everything was fine. At that moment, they end up seeing several people running from one place to another, and they end up getting scared seeing that the people were prepared to take an attack. And in the middle of this, Sora ends up using his reverse age, which ends up making the person end up dodging the attack. And the boar is giving in completely, making him stop running. So Sora asks everyone to run to the city, and the people thank him. Meanwhile, Sora grabs Mumu and asks her to hold on while he runs away, but the boar ends up getting up, and Mumu explains this. In the middle of this, her cart ends up crashing into the ground, and there was no time to worry about the magic stone that was in the cart. They should run away as fast as possible. The boar was going nearby, but everyone was running at full speed. One of the gates had been closed. The guards inside asked everyone to wait and that people had to run because everyone was very close. The people still seemed like they wouldn't arrive, but Sora managed to get there with Mumu. And when Sora looks back, she realizes that the cart was empty, and a little after that, the boar was running toward the adventurers who had gone to take care of the people from the south, but it was too late. They were fighting that huge young man there, and the leader of the group says that it was exactly as they thought. There was a version of the boar that had more legs, that was running with immense power. It was against their nature that they could not use their thighs properly, but they would use the obstacle as a shield, he being a bird, to be able to dodge this monster. So he throws a rock at the monster with everything he has, and gets its attention to run away, realizing that it was impossible to face that monster. But that's why he has to buy some time so that the people can escape. And they manage to survive on their own. But in the middle of this, the guard ends up approaching and apologizing for letting them wait, because he will buy time there. At that moment, all the adventurers get excited about what was happening. The knight soon begins to get ready. The boar advances towards him. Realizing that he was very slow, he threw a spear with everything at the boar's paw and soon prepares to throw it at the other one, which ends up hitting, and yes, hitting one inside the boar's mouth. And it was a very good time for this to happen. And right at that moment, the boar still manages to get up. The knight prepares himself, saying that now it's over. And so he uses the electric flash that ends up ripping off everything else from the boar, ending the life of the animal that falls to the ground. The guard ends up getting excited about this, and the adventurers are excited about his arrival. At that moment, the knight says that the whole was just a rumor, and that the people should leave because they would be late for the festival. Meanwhile, Sora wonders where the child could have gone and screams in all directions. She ends up asking a nearby locksmith if he saw a child there, but he says he hasn't seen anything since the gate closed. Soon, Sora starts to get scared and hits the gate with everything, trying to open it. But the guard ends up stopping her, saying that she shouldn't do that or everyone would lose their lives. But she explains what happened, and the guard says that he doesn't worry about it. He ends up taking a chain and closing the gate with everything, but Sora asks him to wait. The guard says that she would be fine to lose her life if she wanted to, but she shouldn't drag everyone through this. Sora explains that the child was walking outside. And then the guard asked what the lady wanted to open that door for, and that she shouldn't be careless at that moment, and that even an idiot knew what would happen if she opened that gate. And it was still too late by then. The child should have already lost his life. But the locksmiths say they remember his name, and that he should be careful with his words, as the guard was trying to close the gate even though he knew the locksmith was outside. But the guard says he was just trying to save the city. But they say that the guard's job was to fight the monsters, and that Sora was protecting everyone in an extraordinary way, and that the way he was treating people was very bad, and that he should do his job properly. He was just loafing around all day. Every day, he is a trained adventurer, and he should be the tree to take care of everyone alone. But at that moment, he says that he is just a shield user, and he was alone. So he runs off, and at that moment Sora hears and starts to tremble. But she hears the child screaming outside. She knocks on the gate, asking if the child was there. But the child screams for protection. It is only the lady who remembers that Toru said to take good care of each other. And the moment they closed the gate, the child jumped out of the cart to make the cart lighter so she could enter the city. The lady starts to blame herself, saying that because she didn't listen to Toru and because she didn't go to the city in the first place, she starts knocking on the gate, asking if the child was listening, saying that she had a favor to ask to become one with just the child. But he starts to feel the wall knocking and says that the child should do this, otherwise she would lose her life. If she uses her thunder powers now, she still wouldn't have given up, so she would be able to stay alive. There are just so many fun things they should do together, and they haven't even eaten the entire menu from where they were getting it, and they still want to take a shower and get clean with Mumu, but they should still look into much more detail to pet their hair. And at that moment, she asks if she could do more affection, and Sora says that was it. She could do as much as the child wanted. And the child asks if becoming one with her wouldn't make her hated, but the lady says no, there's no reason to hate her. Mumu asks if she won't get upset and be violent at that moment, but she says no. When Mumu's mother was violent with her, she cried all the time and watched from a distance. But you would never say bad things. I would be violent with Mumu because I just had to look at Toru, because he was always there to save people, and now it was Sora's turn to save him. However, if Mumu wants to go somewhere, she would be by her side no matter what happens. And at that time it was just taking Toru along with her. Sora explains that he loves Mumu very much. And at that moment, you can see that there was a hole in that child under the gate. And at that moment, Sora starts running to make the hole too. She starts digging non-stop until she screams Mumu's name, and then the two can touch hands. Sora held Mumu's hand, and so she felt the power within her hands. She could see through Mumu's eyes, and yes, she used the reverse many times. The monster stopped, and again she used the reverse. and the monster stopped again, and again she used the reverse, making the monster fall. She was running out of magic power, and when she tried to use it again, Mumu swallowed hard, and so he managed to use the reverse again. A monster was left lying on the ground. What to do that he lost his life? Mumu touched the monster with everything, and smiling, said that she finally won a fight, and that she is very strong. However, the one who was getting weaker was Sora, who fell with everything to the ground. An hour and a half after the smoke signal was confirmed, the flag was raised from the tower, and the members began to stand in formation, because many high-ranking adventurers had gone to recap operations from another city. A long-distance unit attended, and many long-range attackers and also the gate guards managed to take a defensive position on the walls, and the units managed to get more than 30 people. Another 40 adventurers managed to make a close combat unit, and thus they managed to open the gates to begin the attacks. The low-ranking gate guards and other low-ranking adventurers took up positions in the city in case the gates or walls were breached, so other stronger adventurers approached. And the high number of enemies was detected at the northeast gate. Many of them rushed to check what was happening. And the goblins had obtained wild boars from the sea and managed to mount them, and so they were able to hit the wall with everything to make a huge attack. The goblins tried to climb on top of the wild boars to climb over the wall, but the adventurers didn't let it. They dealt with the goblins somehow. Some of them asked to be careful, but the goblins threw a stone with everything that went through the head of one of them, which made other adventurers be caught by some monsters and thrown with everything towards the goblins and be a mortis right there. Other adventurers said that it had been a long time since they had been in a real battle, but that they should clear that place. The enemies have a countless advantage, but they should not stop. They should take everything they had. So the goblins threw stones, but to repair the large number, many magicians managed to coordinate their magic, and the earth magicians used the magnitude of the earth as a shield to turn the stones that the goblins threw into darkness, and used this opening to open fire with the archers. So the wall gradually began to be defended. The supposed people who were supposed to play the music used it as an advance for the fighters' confidence to reduce fear. The fire and lightning managed to keep the powers high, to be able to break the hordes of goblins, and so right behind all of them there were people there. The goblins managed to be thrown and exploded in the air to use as acid. They used acid bullets, and at that moment some adventurers managed to take these attacks, and it seems that they were tired of waiting, and finally decided to demonstrate themselves. They were the goblin wizards. The archers prepared themselves even more, because they saw that the wizards were hiding, and that wouldn't work. Even so, the arrows hit those goblins with everything, and so they managed to close the unit even more. The ground unit is fighting with everything against the others who were left in front of the gate. Some are gone, but others managed to lose to those monsters. Some adventurers were unable to tell who the real monster is, because a boss was there with everything, using his powers. He raised his hammer, and the adventurers realized that a being was caught in the middle of it too, but when he lowered it, he advanced, exploding everything around him, and everyone had to hold on to avoid being taken by the power. The monsters were thrown, and the forests began to be rebounded, and so they realized that that adventurer created a hole in the ground. He could really make his strength worthwhile, and the other adventurers realized that it was time to go inside the city. Casual happened. But soon that lightning adventurer realized that he somehow managed to hold back the monster, but he noticed something strange according to the protagonist's report. Only the north wall managed to be the only one to be restored, and the monsters decided to mount one on top to make the attack from the north, concentrating their attack on that fortified wall. And I would be sure that the goblins were smarter than that. The commander leader was somewhere, and soon it started to rain. It was just the only fun he had at that moment. But moments before the Battle of the North ended, Toru was running along the walls to fix as much as he could. But then he heard a noise in the forest and decided to find out what it was. There were some goblins that were running towards the southern gates, and soon, said Toru, realizing this situation. Noticing that there were some more strange footprints there too, he realized that the monsters were running behind that wall, somehow running towards the forest. So they were also fighting in the north. Toru didn't know what he should do, if he should go back and call for help, but that would make the goblins able to enter the city, and it was too late to run at that moment. So Toru remembered some moment when he held a child, saying that it wouldn't happen again. But more than anything, he didn't want to lose the dinner table, and with that, the goblins started advancing towards the wall with pickaxes, ready to finish it off. But Toru looked closely. Seeing that they were breaking it, it was just a distraction attack after all. So he held on, and there was a way for him to take those goblins that were closest to the forest without alerting everyone who was close to the wall. When he was trying to immobilize the boar, even the effects of the thunder needle had been lost, and he was able to move at a high speed for a period of time. Toru can remember the feeling of moving his body with all the strength he has. However, it is unknown if he could do it again, but even if it was impossible, Toru should try at least once. So he held the sword and advanced towards the goblins, thus managing to cut off the head of each of them that was away from the wall. Speaking only to those who were there near the wall, Toru used restoration, and everything was fine within that limit. He would be able to take care of it. But he soon felt that something was coming behind him, and so he turned around with everything. It was an intense presence, and he didn't understand what was happening. The only way to do this in the Northern Attack Force commands was to distract the defenses, and because of that, predicting a surprise attack in the south was terrible. It was the chief of the goblins with his force moving. It would be very difficult to do things, but a stone falls on top of a goblin, and they would have to remove the body from there. But soon after, they managed to break the wall, and at that limit, the city will not be quick to sustain an attack from both sides. Toru held on and advanced towards the goblins, taking them one by one. Soon after, he managed to restore the wall, preventing others from entering, so they became irritated. Toru had to fight against 10 goblins, but before it was too late, they advanced on the protagonist, and so he managed to break the teeth of one and cut off the head of the other. One of the goblins had jumped over him, and another went underneath. Toru managed to cut off the arms of one and end the life of another, and that was making the protagonist tired. Soon, a goblin threw a stone at him that hit his sword hard, making it fly away, and yes, when he least realized it, the goblins managed to pierce Toru's body. But it was too late. He grabbed a knife that he had extra and got it into one of their eyes, and so he managed to counterattack the other with his sword and open the hole in his stomach. Toru, with the other sword with everything, the goblins started to laugh, and soon everyone started to lose their laughter, realizing that Toru had gotten up normally. So, he pointed his sword and advanced towards one of them, who started to run little by little, those who were fighting against the ice gods, and one managed to rest. A mysterious person used an elemental ice power, and it made everyone like that and sleep, and Toru knows only one person in that city who can use this kind of elemental power, which was the lady of the inn who welcomes Toru. Toru asks what she was doing there, and realizing this, there was a house nearby. The lady says that places like this are always targeted by the situation, that's why the rent was cheap. The goblins began to wake up little by little, but Toru cut off their heads, and the victory signal from the north has not yet been heard. And it seems that there was something going on with the goblin chief and his troops. There was still a chance that he had gotten involved. Soon, the lady understands the situation just by seeing Toru's reaction. She says that she will not be able to fight for long, but that she would help Toru with everything he needs. He smiles, saying that he only has 3 free uses, so he uses restoration to break the wall with everything, and the goblins looked around carefully in fear of what was happening. The lady used the same skill to make the goblins sleep, and Toru cut off everyone's heads. Again, when they woke up, the same skill was used, but there was someone back there. Toru managed a way to jump on top of everyone and cut them one by one. The goblins began to tremble. It was unbelievable. Just with a breath, these small crystals were released, and the goblins were able to use their regenerative abilities to complete everything that was happening, and only one would remain from that cut. The lady was losing her magical power, and Toru held her so that nothing would have happened. Even if she only uses low-ranked skills, there was still a lot of danger of using them multiple times against several enemies. And from St. Peter, their movement caused fatigue, and that is a lot of energy. That is more than daring. It should be unbelievable. Toru would use a point where she could use the closest reserve, and yes, it would restore her completely. The goblins began to enter with everything and were soon lost, attacked by their own allies. The goblin chief appeared, and this made the protagonist throw himself back. Then he asked the lady if she can walk. Then, at some point, she says that she stopped feeling the pain in her waist, and then Toru says that he will manage a way to fight that monster, and that he shouldn't push her so much. But she says that beating a boss would normally take 5 well-trained heroes of average rank. It's not similar to the test that Toru managed to pass for a low rank, but he tells her not to worry, which was just to watch from a quiet distance. But she understands that she would leave it to him, so she moves away, and the boss ends up advancing the protagonist, who begins to tremble. Soon, Toru realizes that the chest of that world would be well defined, and his skin was like armor. On top of that, it seems he was wearing that boar, and if maybe he could cut that skin with an iron sword, it was useless to know. But he should aim for that monster's head before something happens. Firstly, the boss ends up attacking the protagonist, and Toru dodges it by trying to advance with a direct attack to the head and only using a scratch. Again, The boss tries to advance towards Toru, and the highlight was coming straight from the front. He ends up barely dodging it and throws himself to the side of the monster, realizing that the monster's regenerative ability was starting to work, and the monster just licked the blood that was on his cheek. There was no use for Toru's sword. Even if he attacked the parts not protected by the fur, it would still only regenerate the damage he caused. He should still be able to place his sword somewhere to cause infinite damage, but soon he advances with everything towards the monster, realizing that there was a free place, his eyes, and soon Toru tries to attack with everything. But the monster used his arm, putting him with everything in front, and the sword just went through the skin. Toru's sword ended up breaking, and so the boss started to laugh, but Toru would not give up. Even with the sword cut, he still advanced to attack, cutting the boss's eyes, who ended up screaming in pain and jumping back. Toru still did not give up even with the broken sword. He advanced and gave several attacks in a row, and was tired at that moment. But Toru managed to advance even further, and tried to give the last attack. When he realized that the boss was prepared, he uses restoration on the wall. And when he realizes that the boss was going behind the wall, it was already too late. He ended up managing to build the wall again and fell to the ground. He found some way to do it. He says he should be able to defeat that monster, but he looks back, realizing that the lady would have given Toru a lot of work, saying that he was very tired, and soon he ends up trying to thank her. But when he observes, he realized that he restored her too much, and the lady came back when she was young. Toru is embarrassed, and soon she asks if something is wrong, because his face was very red. But he says no. Toru asks if the girls were unable to return home, but the lady says no, and also she hadn't realized that she was young again. Toru can't even secretly use the restoration now, since it was useless. But she would end up taking care of the situation there and then. Toru thanks her, saying that he will return to the gate, and soon the lady starts thinking about what she should do that night to eat. Time passed, and Toru ran to the north gate to check what was going on. The adventurers and the guard were already there, saying that the party was over, and somehow they managed to find a meeting point, and it seems that the four of them managed to get back in one piece. The group leader says that right after they encountered another boar, the guard saved them, and they managed to meet Sora and Mumu at the gate, so they managed to keep the area protected, even when the gate guards appeared. They even had to join groups to be able to make a turnaround and hunt down each of the forces that were left in the forests. Toru says he owes them something, but the guard says it is not necessary at all. It would be better for Toru to just find a way for him to move, and he wouldn't have to worry about minor things like owing something. So someone would soon get his attention. Toru, it was Mumu and Sora who were there. He runs to hug them too, and everyone gets excited. The kids are happy that everything worked out, and it seems that Toru realized that Sora managed to use the reverse until she ran out of magic. Soon, Sora says that she finally managed to understand that all this time putting her life on the line for someone was really something that takes a lot of courage, but Sora doesn't blame herself for anything. She apologizes for not returning to the city immediately. Toru understands, saying that in fact she managed to realize what is most important to her. Mumu soon asks Toru if he wants to hear about her adventures, but he soon closes his eyes and hugs them. The two ask if something happened, and Toru simply says that he is very happy at that moment, and that they gave their all, and he can't say how happy he is to be able to see them at that moment. It was his fault for thinking that he would be able to leave it to the adults to solve everything, but Sora says that it's not Toru's fault. It was her fault for not being able to do something so simple, and Mumu says that she protected Sora simply as she was told. But Sora says that protecting her was not a good thing, and that next time she would be angry. Toru just smiled and said that the two finally managed to get together. After the day of this event and the goblin attack in the forest, the troops sent by the vice principal, upon managing to return the report, confirmed in detail about the investigation that had been going on for a while. The area near that city was ruined and became a huge dungeon. The high-ranking adventurers infiltrated by the dungeons were surprised and had to deal with many problems at that time. The real problem was the fact that that day onwards was used for infiltration just to take the place, and that the next day was scheduled for the goblin attack. Right at the bar, Dayton says that it was just them since they had to deal with a goblin attack, and that there was something they had to deal with the destruction of the dungeon. If it had anything to do with each other, Saku says that it was just speculation on his part, that it would need a more intense investigation to see the truth, and that the adventurer's director should take care of the situation. After they exchanged a few glances, Saku realized that from the moment the attack was reported, the interception was very poor, and that in the midst of it all, everyone was distracted by the division of goblins that were infiltrating the city. Told after a while, There was an adventurer who decided to deal with the situation with a lot of trouble, and that would not change the fact that his efforts were flawed. Deiden ends up thanking for everything that happened at that moment, and that if it weren't for that adventurer, the city would probably be completely destroyed at that moment. Saku says he shouldn't laugh at this situation, but he understands what they were trying to say. They wanted Deiden to find a way to reduce those numbers once and for all, but Saku couldn't just sit there quietly. They were going to distribute the funds for repairing the wall. Saku says that everything is in Daiden's hands, and that he could bring this situation up at the next committee meeting, and that they would compensate those who fought well the next day. At that, Deiden says that the air became heavy again. Even with his numbers reducing, the work continues to multiply, and this continues to make their morale drop, but Saku says to investigate. And it was inevitable given the current circumstances. There is no civilian currently who would care about the offense that was caused by them, the gatekeepers. Even if they don't care, it was still all in their hands, and he managed to simply close the gates with the people who were outside. That gave them a bad image, since he said that they really need to thank the people who are there to fight, and all that would cause a penalty for 3 people, compared to the 112 he lost 9 years ago. Deiden said it was hard to believe that a horrible person, his disciple, had become so capable of doing something. Saku says that the person in question only became an adventurer by herself, the nameless heroes in which they defeated the goblins and their boss. Still, it was a very suspicious rumor of who also managed to restore the wall, and there is still something happening in the city where they are trying to find the nameless heroes. Deiden says that that guy has become beyond what was expected, and so they toast, saying that they would take it for that. Saku and Deiden take another one, and then Deiden asks if they heard about the elf who was there, the person who recognized the disappointment when she saw it, but there was no mystery that she really was. Saku was completely surprised, and that she returned to the beauty she was before. Deiden says that having her back young, maybe they could do something for all these times. They managed to get back in this story to hold themselves in that moment. So Deiden asks if he was talking about the city that was nearby. His mother says that they went there to deal with that, the dungeon, but the boss's labyrinth was causing some problems, and that it wouldn't be easy. Maybe Saku thinks there was a guy who could try harder and become stronger at that moment. Toru appears, looking directly at the guard, saying that he is here, leaving the gate guardians, leaving the city behind, and he says that he didn't get along very well with the other one, who only committed the act of closing the gate, leaving people out. His adventurer status was removed, and he was exiled from the city after all that happened. That unforgiving guy was his companion for years, so he couldn't abandon him easily. He was reflecting on his actions, so he ended up letting these things happen. He also looks at Sora, apologizing because he didn't show up when she needed help, and was supposed to tell the child that he is a nice guy. It was a difficult mission, but Toru doesn't plan to teach anyone a lie. The guard smiles, and Toru clenches his fist. The discouraged guard ends up touching one another, and says that it was a gift he could give him. Soon after, Toru ends up remembering the moment he repaired the boy's sword, saying that that skill could last longer. The guard smiles but soon cries, saying that that skill is not useless at all. The guard cries when he sees that his hand has returned, and intensely thanks Toru for everything he has done during all these years, and says that that skill is truly incredible. So Toru leaves, saying goodbye. Later, they decide to eat meat together with Sora and Mumu, who said that it was amazing. Toru was just making the meat and food, and there are still many other wild boar things that they could eat. A soup with several potatoes and other chicken things too, and some onions. It still had a great time smell, and there were still many things for him to eat in peace. The day before, Toru accidentally made the lady become younger. Somehow, he managed to make a woman return to her beauty and return her to a younger age. He even asked her if she thought about it in any way, and it seems that she liked it. The girls started to eat and feel how good it was. Toru ate and drank along with it, because dark beer was very good with that type of food. And the cats ate too. That was a perfect dinner table. Sora and Mumu ate until they felt stuffed. Toru says that she ate 5 plates of food, while the lady approaches, saying that she is happy that they liked the food. At that moment, the lady says that the pleasure is all hers and it was a gift for them to defeat 2 huge boars. And now, realizing this, their adventurer identification turned blue, meaning that they increased their ranking. Mumu says that it's not fair. I know hers isn't, but Toru tells her not to worry, and that she'll quickly reach the highest ranking very quickly, because she's the strongest among them all. In the end, the child smiled at this, and the lady said that it was very strange that the promotion had been so slow. Even he defeated the goblin boss after all, and the dungeon itself had not yet been conquered. Toru said that it was unfortunate, and that he lost the chance to get a skill again, since he could conquer a dungeon. But he was very happy that everything went well, and that no one was drastically injured. Furthermore, he predicted that the monsters would invade the city, and even took 2 gold coins, so even more so he could make new equipment with what he gained. The monsters he was thinking about, gradually making progress. The lady smiles, saying that in note of this, Toru wanted to ask her something. The lady asks what it is, and soon Toru asks if everything was okay there on adventures with the group. The children are perplexed, and the lady just looks sharply at Toru. She is very happy with the invitation, but someone as old as her should hold back. So Toru asks if she has another kind of problem and takes her hand, saying that maybe he can help her take a look. He carefully observes the lady's skill tree, observing all the memories. Even looking at her entire personal history, it still doesn't seem like a particular problem, but when he looks closely at the base of the skill tree, he wonders what would happen there. There was a huge globe of obstruction that prevented the owner from gaining a skill point in any skill. At that moment, the lady realizes that Toru can understand people's skill trees without even using measuring equipment, and she says that it was a cursed fruit, and that is the reason why she will choose to stop being an adventurer. At that time, she was walking when she observed attentively a beautiful maiden, and soon the carriage left, or was that it? She asks what that was, and that perhaps it was the leader of a nearby temple who was living on a remote island. She said she wanted to meet the lady, and her nickname was a cursed witch, but the girls ask her not to talk about it so calmly. Soon, the maiden asks the lady to be a teacher. She thanks her for appearing and going to that remote island so far away, but she cannot do it, and the reason why was that someone wanted to be a candidate for the hero. Then she would stop being an adventurer, and perhaps the maiden says that the lady was a killer of magic users normally to defeat Japan from a labyrinth and seal the black hole. The fruit was added in the triumph of the skill tree, but there is a skill that could curse the user and only those who use magic in a certain labyrinth. Maybe that's just a rumor, but it doesn't matter if you're abandoned by the group or simply get tired of being an adventurer. There's a reason why you could stop being an adventurer, and it's not a problem. And then the maiden asks the lady for her knowledge, and Toru saw all these memories. The lady still adds that, in the discrepancy of the temple, she still became a teacher and became a person who only observes the dreams of younger generations while watching them grow. Toru understands this and says that the effects of the curse have arrived, and this seems to reduce the amount of skill points she receives for defeating monsters from 1 to 10, and also the amount of magic that supports within the person. At that time, Toru panicked when he realized that the lady's maximum skill is intense, and used restoration to bring back to her the times that could use a lot of skill. Sora asks if Toru couldn't use restoration to remove the curse. Toru says that since it's not a branch in the skill tree, then he could maybe use restoration as many times as he wanted, but nothing would reverse the time of the one in the curse, so it can't be used to remove a skill fruit. Sora asks if he could see that too, and the lady said it was okay. Sora asks Mumu for help, but she was so full that she couldn't move, and soon they say that if she lays on her stomach on the floor, she could become a fat cat, and that paralyzes the cats that were there. And at that moment then, Mumu goes up to take a look at the skill tree. Then everyone gathered around to observe the lady's skill tree. Even the lady froze in that moment, as it was strange that she could see the skill tree so clearly. They soon asked if it was amazing and if it was all thanks to Mumu. They then petted the girl and, yes, observed a tree closely. The cursed fruit was there. Sora observes the whole situation and looks at that huge fruit head-on, closes her eyes, and everyone asks what she is going to do. When she opens it, she explodes the fruit with everything, and at that moment she managed to reverse, increasing and accelerating the acquisition points to grow more. So, after reversing the curse, she says she just thinks she did it and asks the lady how she feels. But the lady doesn't answer anything. In fact, she stays quiet for a while. And that was the question, what happened? The lady hugs the girl and starts crying. The girl simply returns the hug, and right in the middle of it, she gives her hand to Toru, and soon someone in the middle of the two says that they can't breathe. It was Mumu who was still there, and in the end they end the night laughing. The next day, they go to the Adventurers Center. It was very empty, but that was because the plan to recover the city was over, and now the adventurers could return to the hunting grounds. Sora says she'd draw a lot with Mumu on the board, but Toru asks them not to draw too much. Meanwhile, Toru invites the woman to become an adventurer there. Arriving there, despite some very noisy people, it still seemed empty. They approach another receptionist and ask if they could register a new adventurer. She says yes, and the lady ends up smiling. The receptionist gets embarrassed and says they accept new registrations there. The lady's name is Eurylis, and says it's a pleasure to meet the receptionist. The receptionist asks Eurylis to fill out the registration form, and she watches closely. Toru approaches, asking if they need any adventurers to introduce them to a world of adventure. The form states that the lady is 22 years old and that she's from a distant city, and that explains the ears, but they have no problem with that. The lady's real name was a little longer, but they registered it with her granddaughter's name as an abbreviation. But now she would have to touch the globe, and at that moment she approaches and touches the entire globe. Since she could demonstrate her skills at that moment, even with 3 small branches, it was still a lot that she could do, and all 3 of them had a lot of fruits on them. On top of that, in the middle of the skill, branches were full of others to make even greater growth, and all skills have a maximum level of 9, and there are still many things that they could not keep, and guarantee she at least has 4 skills played at maximum. The receptionist watches from a distance, asking what classification she would be. Maybe she would be in the letter C classification, but they decide to put her in the letter B classification. But Toru says that new registrants can't start from a lower rank, but the receptionist says that Toru can't do anything about it, but those were just thinking to themselves. Maybe the system has changed, but it would be very problematic if she took that rank right there and then, because adventurers who are more than 2 ranks apart cannot be in the same group as another, so the hunt and everything else they could do would end at that exact moment. Then Toru notices another receptionist who was talking to the other adventurer, and he quickly says he wanted to confirm something, but the other receptionist gets irritated by this. The lady apologizes, but it was okay for them to wait for a moment. The receptionist soon asks if she can touch the lady's hair, and at that moment Toru approaches the hero's conversation, who was requesting the title of Modest Hero, but, as mentioned before, she couldn't make it public. However, the adventurer insists on asking, even for the initials, but he says there's nothing he can do about it. Since they weren't making progress, they ended up becoming distant. There was a female knight there, and she asked about the age at which she should be calm, and that she should be a little earlier, but that was also strange. Toru approaches, saying she's 39 years old and things must have ended for a while, but she's asking the receptionist for help to make something happen. He says he's there to register a friend, and it seems she's received a much higher rating. The receptionist asks if the evaluation has already been done with the device, and Toru explains that it has. She then explains that a rating can't be changed now, that it's different from the new registration, and should be more efficient. If you start at a higher rank, it would be because of the skill tree. But even now, Toru can't restore the lady's entire skill tree to use that stuff. Another receptionist appears, saying he'll take care of the matter and would handle it however he wants. Toru asks to lower the rank a bit so they can form a group, but since they don't do anything too extreme, they can only lower it to C rank. And Toru ponders this, and soon they say that if the protagonist's group gets a promotion, it's no problem. The nearby Goblin Tavern could get Toru a promotion. Currently, there is no group trying to conquer, and if they wish, they could prioritize the protagonist's group to find out what caused the hole previously. Besides, the Brazilian monsters were defeated, and the cave was conquered many days ago since the labyrinth boss was defeated, so they should have been placed by now. It seems incredible. So Toru goes. The other adventurer says that Toru is a little older than she expected, and that he could show some success after throwing himself at the adventurers, but he says that he lied and apologizes for it. So he leaves. Soon, another adventurer says that maybe it's a lie too, and nobody knows if it's a lie or not. But he says that it doesn't matter, that it was curious that a person of that age still had a chance to become famous as an adventurer. Toru says that it's none of her business there, so he leaves, but the adventurer says he's not ready yet and doesn't finish talking to Toru. Toru turns around, asking if he has anything to say. She was just listening, but it seems he's still going after a dungeon. So she decides to compete with Toru to see who can finish that dungeon first. The other adventurer says that it seems a little strange, but she dies so young and that it wouldn't cause much concern. And then the adventurer says that he would let Toru go first, and he says that he is in her debt. And then another adventurer says that there is a chance he can still do it, so they have no right to challenge someone to a dungeon since they haven't finished recording for the adventurer. Soon, they ask Toru to watch closely behind them, and soon returning, Mumu asks if Toru is going to take a bath. Meanwhile, the other adventurer asks if Toru is married because he has a child, and Sora approaches, saying that she is his wife. The adventurer says that he never heard anything about that guy being married and still having children. It seems that she should calm down and believe that she is just an associate of Toru, and soon she introduces herself as Sora. She is in the same group as Toru, and that her was Mumu. And soon, Mumu invites everyone to take a bath. The adventurer says everything is fine and ends up introducing the two to make sure she sees the winning positions. And soon, another adventurer gives Mumu a candy, and she says she will accept it with pleasure. And soon after eating, they leave. So they laugh and leave at that moment. After a while, the lady was getting her hair done by the receptionist, saying that it was amazing at the time, and she says that she got something very cheap, but she was still very happy to have her kindness. Another receptionist appears, apologizing to Eurylis, and then hands over her adventurer ID. She thanks him. That ID was black, which means he was mature and fun. The lady smiles, and Ricardo smiles too. He quickly apologizes for inviting her, and ending up waiting a long time, but then says it's not Toru's fault. She wasn't given a B rating, so the receptionist was alarmed. Toru soon says they're going to conquer the Goblin Cave so they can get closer to her ranking as quickly as possible. She should wait a little longer for things to work out. She says that she is much more patient than Toru thinks, and that she will patiently wait for him in everything that happens. Sora says that everything seemed like a blink of an eye to the lady, and soon they go to the Goblin Forest. Days after the adventurer registration, Toru and his group went to Goblin Caves. To reach the next rank, they had to defeat the boss in the deepest areas of the cave and conquer the dungeon within at least 15 days. But there's a reason why this isn't so simple. Several other adventurers were going with them. One of my favorite things about dungeons is that you can find various ores on the labyrinth walls. For these reasons, when someone goes to explore the Goblin Cave, they are accompanied by miners, who the group is forced to measure in some way. Anyway, the Goblin Cave only has 3 floors. Due to circumstances, if they defeat the boss, it will return in 2 hours. However, the villagers can only work during quiet hours. Sora soon asks if it wouldn't be more effective to exploit while they were mining. Fighting while mining was prohibited, and the villagers could be implicated. While they had no choice but to proceed, taking turns exterminating the monsters and mining, the miners began to proceed. All the miners were prepared, and then they stand outside waiting. They wonder if it was okay for a child to join a group like that. But they ask who knows about the situation if the adventurer gave the child permission. So the most they can do is simply wait. But instead of staying still, they decide to enter the cave. As soon as they cross the entrance, they realize that it was so dark inside that it was almost impossible to see a hand in front of them. Sora, without thinking much, realizes that she can't see anything at all, and decides she's going to turn on a flashlight to light the way. However, before she can do so, Toru firmly asks her not to light anything, explaining that if the light were to appear, the goblins would immediately appear. Sora, a little frustrated, comments that, the way she was, she wouldn't be able to take even a single step forward. Mumu then springs into action, saying that she would use her special ability to see perfectly in that completely dark space, and that everyone should leave it to her. So, after observing the environment for a long time and getting used to the darkness, everyone ended up realizing what was really happening. Suddenly, a stone flies towards them. Toru reacts quickly and defends her, commenting that the monsters were moving much faster than he had imagined. Without wasting any time, he asks everyone to follow him immediately. Then, with all determination, Toru charges into the fight. Another rock comes flying towards him, but he dodges it nimbly. 2 goblins suddenly appear, and Toru doesn't hesitate with a quick movement. He cuts off both of their heads. Soon after, another stone is thrown at him. Toru grabs it and throws it straight into the chest of a goblin, taking the opportunity to decapitate the other one that was right behind. Meanwhile, outside, the residents who are waiting decide to take a short break for a snack. But just as they are about to eat, the adventurers return. They soon ask if the monsters have already appeared. Toru calmly responds that yes, and that they were already ready. The residents were surprised, as it seemed like not even an hour had passed since they entered. Toru, to prove it, shows the result of the subjugation, leaving everyone open-mouthed at the tranquility that now reigned. He explains that there were probably no enemies left there. The girls praised him, saying that he had handled the situation perfectly. Then, with renewed enthusiasm, everyone commented that it was time to get up and get on with mining. So they enter the cave with their pickaxes in hand, ready to work. In the midst of all this, a lady notices that Toru's sword is getting more and more worn, and wonders if he can restore it to its original state. But Toru explains that his restoration ability doesn't work on items that aren't directly combat-related. That is, things like armor and weapons could only be restored if they had suffered a direct impact during a battle. As the miners advance, they also take the opportunity to clear out some monsters that were still roaming the area. Mumu helps by stacking rocks, while Toru and Sora decide to take a short break to rest. But soon after, they would have to go to the second floor.